I swear I prepared for this. So. Hello, my dear friends. It's groovy to see you. In case we haven't met before, I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings. I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people, which is exactly what we're doing in this episode with a big helping of Gregory Foxx Jr. In case that name sounds familiar to you, you might have heard about him from the second episode of my look at the HP Lovecraft Film Festival in Mobile, Alabama in 2023. His short film entry was The Duppy Man's Walk, which I enjoyed, and Greg was one of the highlighted filmmakers that came to talk to us in Mobile, brought a couple of his cast members. They were all very entertaining, and I had such a good time talking to Greg. I found what he had to say so interesting, and it seemed like we would have a lot to talk about if we did that. I reached out, asked him, hey, let's do a talk, and he said yes. Now let me tell you a little bit more about Greg before we get into it. He has spent years in the film industry, and I mean the big one with money, not just the independent film scene, the big blockbuster movies. So he's done big screen, small screen, on screen, off screen, theater, home, film festivals around the world and online. He's all over it. So I hope you enjoy all the film stuff we talk about and some things that I really did not see coming in this interview. My dear friends, welcome to the channel. Our new dear friend, Gregory Foxx Jr. Brother Greg, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Glad to have you. Glad you got time from your busy schedule to come visit with us. For those in the audience who haven't checked out Greg on IMDb before, he's been a camera assistant, production assistant, location manager, director, writer. He's worked with props over at least 7 years in the film industry,
Yeah.
and about 20 movies and TV shows. Do I have those numbers right?
20 plus, yeah.
20 plus. Well, and the number's always growing, right?
Yeah, and I don't have everything on IMDb because I have to update it myself. So it's probably around 30, but that's a good number.
Oh, okay. Glad to learn more about you. And that's one of the things that I asked you and our previous interviewee, Jeff Gorsica, actor and short film creator, and him and his people have been working on a feature length together, and that should be coming out later this year. One of the reasons I'm interested in talking to y'all is because a lot of people know about movies, but they've never worked with movies. And so they might watch a behind the scenes expose on this movie or that movie, but there's a lot to it. It's kind of a way of life, isn't it?
Yeah, it's much less a job than it is a lifestyle. It's not just a job, it's an adventure. Film production runs a lot like a military operation. We go to the middle of nowhere with a bunch of trucks. We build small cities. We set up equipment. We play in them for 12 hours. We break them down. We move them someplace else and do it all again. So in that sense, it's definitely more than people expect. I mean, construction, painters. I worked in a department called Greens one time where we dirted over paved streets. And then when the scene was done, we had to pick up all the dirt and put it back in the truck. So, it's just the whole world of blue collar and trade jobs that really make the fabric of the film industry that people never think about, because once the actors and the directors and the writers have passed in the credits, people tune out. But there's a whole universe of other talented individuals there to help bring it all together.
Yeah, and you can have a top shelf director, a name actor, but unless they're doing some ultra minimalist thing with one camera, with the director and that one actor in a single room, somebody has to build all the rest of that goes into it. Right. So they can't do it themselves. And of the folks that I'm familiar with that have talked about the lesser known or the unsung heroes of film production, Bruce Campbell of B-movie fame, but he usually talks about the not name actors who still make a living in doing what it is they do. But even those people can't get anywhere without folks making it happen. And like we just mentioned, you've got a CV of making things happen all over the place. I love your analogy about it's like a military operation. That
It really is.
I hadn't thought of it that way before, but now that you say it, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. The director is your commanding officer, but the studio is the headquarters someplace else. They can always screw with everybody here, and you can't go out to the field without these people giving you the money to go do it. That's all falling into place. Wow.
Transportation moves all the gear. Without transpo, shows shut down. Hair and makeup artists, think of something like The Walking Dead, where you got 60 walkers that need 6 hours in prosthetics and special effects makeup before they can even just go hang out and wait to be called. And those are really the unsung heroes. There's a lot of people people and a lot of departments involved that have career paths that, especially when I talk to younger people who say they want to get into the film industry, oh, well, what are you interested? Well, I like to write, I want to direct. Okay, but there's a ton of other stuff that can get you in the door. So it's always interesting. It's always good to think about it in that way for me, because you realize you can't do it alone. Like, no soldier goes out and holds a post by his lonesome. It takes a team of communication specialists, facility specialists, and all those things really come into play into making films.
So what is it that got you into working on videos, films in the first place? What hooked you to want to do that with your life?
You're gonna laugh, but when I was a kid, I've always known I wanted to do this. It just took me years to actually find an end. But when I was a kid, I saw Indiana Jones and I wanted to be an archaeologist. I saw Jacques Cousteau specials and I wanted to be a marine biologist. I saw Magnum PI, I wanted to be a private investigator. And then the reality hit me. There's no way in hell you're going to be all that. But what it did is it brought me to the idea of being a storyteller. Because as a storyteller, you get to live vicariously in those moments, and you can kind of use your intellectual curiosity to kind of explore what's out there for you, explore what your interests are. But then you can sit and create your own little play world. I was a kid that was grounded a lot. Okay. And back in the day when I was grounded, there was only maybe one TV in the house. There was no TV in your room. Nintendo and all that good stuff came along later, but I had lots of books, and books were kind of my introduction to the creative world. And I'm like, if I can sit here and read it, I can write it as well. And that got me into writing. Eventually, I found the medium of film, because before I was just doing like flip books. I would go get the super fat deck of, I guess nowadays you call them Post-it notes, and just draw one frame on each one and then make little flip books. And in middle school, I discovered the AV Club. And from that point, it was a wrap. I've always had a vivid imagination and kind of lived in my own thoughts. So writing them down became therapy, and that therapy led me to the film world. But I've always known I've wanted to do it. I actually went to college in California and tried to study some classes, ended up in LA in like 2001. Then that writer's strike happened, and that like ended scripted TV for a long time. So I had to get on with the rest of my life. And then finally at 40, I was in Orlando working in commercial real estate asset management. And I told my wife, I'm going to hate myself if I don't give it one more chance. She said, you want to move back to LA? I was like, no. And Atlanta was an option and was nearby. So we came here with a 5-year plan to see if we could find some way for me to get in. And it happened for me. I've been working ever since. I took Georgia Film Academy class at what used to be Pinewood Studios. It's Trillic now. Made a lot of networks there, met a lot of good people, had an internship, a 60-day internship on Finding Steve McQueen. Forrest Whitaker, William Kirshner, Travis Fimmel, and the producer. He asked me if I wanted to get hired on and finish the show with him, and I did. That was my first job.
That's awesome. So when it comes to film, you're a late bloomer as far as like actually working
Yes.
directly with the
Yes.
productions of it. Okay.
Absolutely. LA is a hard end to get in LA because it's so filled with generations of network, and those become tough to penetrate. But Atlanta's a really welcoming film community. It skews younger. There's a lot of opportunities, especially with the time that I got here. Taking that path through the Georgia Film Academy, I was able to meet the right people to get me on and take advantage of it. So I gave up the real estate thing, let my license lapse, and this is all I've been doing since.
That's really neat. So, one, you're a living example of don't give up on what it is you're the most passionate about. Do something with it, because you're right, that regret thing, you only have a finite amount of time and you don't know when that clock sounds. So you better do something with it, whether you're doing it on the side as a hobby or whether you're dedicating yourself to it full time. The folks in the audience, yeah, that's you. Pay attention to this. If this applies
It's
to
never
you,
too late.
yeah, make a plan. So if you don't mind me asking before we go on to more film related questions, between 2001 and when you turned 40, what all were you doing in that time? You said you did some real estate. Was it all real estate?
Well, no, because when I was in LA, I was supposed to have an in with this guy to get a internship. It turns out that was just a lot of talk. So I went to work as a bouncer at a strip club, the Jet Strip in Lenox on Hawthorne.
Oh,
And,
it's memorable,
and
huh?
yeah, it was bad, but it actually, there I was able to meet some people in the industry. Michael Clark Duncan used to come in all the time, and he's a big dude. I'm like 6'3", probably 325, 330. And he used to come in, I would see him at the door, and I always used to, because his story was super interesting. He used to be like dig ditches in Chicago before somebody found him, asked him to be a security guard on movie sets. I think he did Fresh Prince, and that's how he got into the industry. And he used to always tell me, don't give up, don't ever give up. And like for straight from John Coffey's mouth. So I had to do more than I was doing as far as income. So I moved back to Florida, and our family business is kind of real estate there. So I fell in where I fit in. From 2004, when we left Los Angeles, to 2015, when we moved to Atlanta, it was a mix of asset management, and I also consulted as a chef for a couple of different restaurants. I spent a lot of time cooking in those years where I was doing nothing, and that helped me when I got back to Orlando, which is kind of restaurant pops up every week there. That was something that I was able to do. I spent some time in Alaska, in California, Los Angeles cooking. So when I came home, that was something creative that I loved. I came on as a consulting chef. So we opened a few barbecue concepts, a couple Italian concepts, fast casual type stuff. And between that and real estate, that's what I was doing until I moved.
So you're a culinary type. What's your favorite dish?
Dish.
Or cuisine if you can't do just one. If you need a whole category, that's
You know
fine.
what's funny? I hate fish for the most part. I only eat a couple of types of fish, but I love shellfish. And I really love the California contemporary style of cuisine because it's a fusion of Mediterranean and Asian techniques with a lot of shellfish, a lot of pastas, a lot of good beef dishes. So I love California contemporary cuisine just because you can do so much with it and the products. Like I love Dungeness. I'm from Florida, but you keep your blue crabs. I only buy Dungeness. You know what I mean? And that was
Yeah.
something that I got introduced to out in the Pacific. And that's really my favorite type of thing to cook because it's fresh, it's versatile. You can use a lot of different products. You can use Asian influences. You can use Mexican, South American influences. You can use, artichokes and blue cheese if you like. Just the California contemporary cuisine has a lot of stuff you can do with it. It's not really bound by a lot of different flavor profiles or specific techniques. It's kind of free flowing and it's the Jeet Kune Do of the culinary world. You know what I mean?
For those who aren't aware of what a Dungeness crab is or Dungeness, I'm not entirely sure what the official pronunciation is. Is it Dungeness or is it Dungeness?
I don't know. I just know they're 4 times the size of blue crabs,
And they're
and that's worth my
delicious.
money. Yeah, they're
So
sweet. Yeah.
yeah, I believe they come from near Alaska, that Pacific Northwest area, and they are almost sweet enough to be a dessert and without anything on them. You don't need butter to make these things work. I mean, you can add it, and sometimes it's a benefit, sometimes you're covering up the flavor of the meat. They are delicious, and they do sometimes have them frozen across the country. So if you've never heard it before, go check out Dungeness crab and give yourself a try to that, folks at home. You'll thank us. You'll thank Greg for bringing
Absolutely.
that up.
Absolutely.
That's cool. One thing I've noticed, because you mentioned how that California contemporary incorporates pasta, and you reminded me of when my wife and I went to Rome last year. And so I got a lot of fresh pasta, whereas previously I had just been, the stuff that gets rehydrated and then you make spaghetti here. And I said, wife, we should have a lot more of this. And she said, well, I got a pasta maker. And I asked, woman, you've been holding out on me all this time. You could have been giving me fresh pasta and you ain't been doing it. But bless her heart, she's gotten the thing out. She's been making me fresh pasta. Oh, it's just also, folks at home, if you haven't had fresh pasta, do the fresh pasta.
And it's
Treat
really
yourself.
not that hard. It's like flour, eggs, salt, oil. It's really simple to make the doughs.
Yeah. So thanks for the quick sum up of where Greg was before the film industry. Before we get into the film industry part of it, does any of the experience you gained from those previous jobs benefiting you now? Like the way you think, the way you plan, the way you organize your work?
Absolutely. And it's crazy because I tell people this all the time. Every bullshit job I ever had before somehow trained me for what it is I do now. I used to be a jungle cruise skipper at Disney as a high schooler. Taught me how to deal with audiences. I've worked in fast-paced restaurants in the kitchen where communication is imperative and so is speaking directly and working with urgency. The real estate thing taught me how to read legalese, taught me how to deal with contracts, B2B relationships. Working at the strip club taught me how to deal with different personalities. Do you know what I mean? It's crazy. So everything along the way has kind of, even though I might have thought, oh my God, this is so dead end, I gotta get out of here. Little pieces of it I'm able to utilize all the time in the film industry and even in the creative spaces. So my mom was a 17-year military veteran. I spent a lot of time on military bases overseas, Italy, Turkey, all throughout the United States. And you can't really write anything if you don't have any stories to tell. You can create stories all day long, but if there's no gravitas, no perspective, no dimension to them, you don't create something three-dimensional for audiences. You just basically rehash what somebody else has done. So even that stuff, I pull from it all the time. I love going to places where I have to stand in line because I just pick somebody out in line and I try to see the world and conversations from their perspective. I try to be that person for a little while. And this is something I always did since I was a kid. All that stuff, somehow it's made me what I am. And when I was in jobs and in places where I thought this is never going to work to my benefit in any way other than a paycheck, I was wrong about 90% of it.
That's a great take. There's so much to that. I get younger writers, authors, adventure designers that I talk to, and I've got a longer track record of publications than they do. And so I've got a little more experience and I'm glad to help them out. But there's that question of what do I write? And the common answer to that is write what you know. Well, if you've never done nothing,
Right.
if you haven't experienced anything, if your heart hasn't been broken, if you ain't been on a bender and got hit by a car or whatever, now don't go do that. But I'm just talking about real world stuff that leaves a memory in you, a feeling in you, something interesting for you to tell folks about. Get you some life experience before you start writing anything or creating anything, because as we're going to cover in some of the stuff that Greg's written and directed later on, I'm sure some of what you lived through comes up in that.
Sure.
You seem like a man of good perspective. You've got your feet grounded in reality and life because you've been living it, right?
This is true. This is true.
But you mentioned the strip club twice now, and I am a fan of looking at ladies, so I got to ask you about the strip club. I've been to a few of my time. When I lived around Portland, Oregon, man, they're everywhere, top quality. And my favorite one was this place called Acropolis. It was a steakhouse slash strip joint. And the steak was like the whole plate with two sides was like 15 bucks. And it's the best steak you could get short of a prime steakhouse. I mean, it was magnifique, cooked and marbled and just all the flavor. And then there's, the ladies dancing in front of you while you're having your steak. There's a lot of different styles of strip clubs, a lot of different moods that go on in them. Some of them, the ladies and everybody working there are clearly a bunch of mosquitoes just trying to get all the blood out of you. And in some of them, they encourage just having a good time and relaxing, which
Yeah.
helps me give them my money because
Right.
I don't feel threatened. What was the one you worked at like? Where did it fall on that spectrum of fun versus desperation?
So it was the first strip club I had ever been to. And I worked at it when I was 25, right? I think I was like probably 23 to 25 because I worked there for about 3 or 4 years. So it was my first experience in a strip club at all. But let me tell you, after the first 2 weeks, the magic was gone. All the mystery had like, and I don't like go to them now, but it was a lot of fun. Not necessarily because I worked around naked ladies all day. It was called the Jet Strip, and it's in a little part of unincorporated Los Angeles. So in Los Angeles, either you can be totally nude or you can sell alcohol, but you can't do both. So where we were was unincorporated LA, a little town called Lenox. This is off of Hawthorne Boulevard between El Segundo and Torrance. Okay. And so we were allowed to do both. And because of that, a lot of celebrities, a lot of people that worked at other strip clubs came there. They actually filmed the movie Domino there. If you've ever seen Domino,
I've heard of it.
that strip club scene is actually the Jet Strip. But I still stay connected to some of the people that I work there with. A friend of mine named Ricky Liberatore, he was the DJ there. He's now a prop master in the Buffalo area and does live shows. He actually told me about the unions and stuff back then. But the Jet Strip was cool. It put more emphasis on having fun. I was always confused by the fact, why do you want bare naked booty and food in the same place? It just seemed like those two things wouldn't necessarily naturally associate. Like you wouldn't do that at home. But I actually did get a chance to work in the kitchen there a few times because I had a culinary background. And if the chef was going on vacation or sick or whatever, and VIP parties, they would ask me to come in and like do whatever. I used to make a faux pho, and that's something something that they really seemed to like there. But I had a lot of fun there. I met some interesting people, and it was it was a cool little joint as far as I could tell. Like the ladies were friendly, they were professional. We didn't have fights. I was a bouncer, a floor manager, and sometimes I cooked, but I called myself a conflict resolution specialist because even at my size, the first thing I want to do is drop the level of tension. And my personality and my size, I'm sure, helped me do it in a lot of ways that like we weren't isolating people or making them feel on blast. And they really appreciated that. And they kept rising me up to the ranks until I was ready to go. But it was a cool spot. I'd go there if you're ever in LA out that way. They don't do steaks, but when I was there, they did a mean ass shrimp and black bean burrito. It was really good. It was really good.
Are they paying you to help advertise for them? Because this is a detailed review of the place to go. I mean, it
You know,
sounded
writers are
enticing.
wordy.
Speaking of writing and strip clubs and food, the single most read thing I've ever written is my review of Acropolis on Google's reviews. It's got well over 20,000 views. And, I'm okay with, I kind of feel good about that being the thing that I would be most known for of anything I've written. Now, not a lot of people are willing to like that review,
Right.
but they reading that review. What did you learn? Say one thing that you learned about a few key points of the strip club, like the ladies. What's something that you think people would like to know about the ladies that work there?
They are ladies. It's funny because I don't want to use the word objectified, but let's be quite frank, that's what it is. When they're on stage, they're objectified. But when they come off those stages, they're somebody's wife, they're somebody's mother. If you're at the Claremont in Atlanta, they're somebody's grandmother. You know what I mean? So
Whoa, is this a
they are
grandmother you'd
people.
want to see, or is this, Social
Well,
Security ain't getting her far enough? She got to make ends meet.
it's an Atlanta institution. I'm not going to plug them, but you got to look it up. The Claremont Lounge and Hotel in Atlanta. Just check it out. It was actually on an episode of Anthony Bourdain's Layover. It's an Atlanta institution. It's a strip club for over 40 ladies, and it's packed every day of the week. And they have really good drinks, a rooftop bar, and steak.
That sounds pretty good. And just because they're an older stripper doesn't mean that they're not good at it, because technique, experience,
Right.
showmanship, all those are skills
Yes.
that have to be developed over time.
Yeah. And they
Um,
don't call it a strip club, they call it a house of burlesque. So that's to your point about the artistry and the showmanship. I haven't been there either, but I worked on a show where we actually shot on the rooftop bar, and I was mind blown by the whole experience. Just kind of like, wow, that's crazy.
that is crazy. For the guys that go to the club, what's something that you picked up about them? Is there some lesson you can tell us about?
Not necessarily because I didn't really engage with a lot of them. You know, it's kind of weird to think about the idea that this guy might be, sexually excited, and then I'm going to go sit down next to him and have a conversation. But I would say that they come from all walks of life. Some guys view it purely as entertainment. Other guys, like I've seen dudes sit in a club with a book, you know what I mean? And chill. So I will say it's different things to different people. Some guys I know, they would just come to blow off steam after work. Or sometimes they had friends that would go, or their friend's girlfriend worked there. So they were just going to hang out with him. But I can tell you it was never about the music. Um, it was never about the music.
Your
But
DJ friend was not appreciated to the
no,
degree
no,
he
no, no.
deserved. Okay.
Nobody cared about Ricky.
We care about you, Ricky. We care. When I go to the strip clubs, I'm encouraging. I say nice things to the ladies. I'm like, you did a great job. And I always make sure to tip, at least a respectful amount. Even if I don't want necessarily to watch that lady dance, I'm still going to be polite. But if you go to a club and this is what you do when you see the ladies come out, give them that I'm going to put you in my trunk look. Don't do that. That's
No.
creepy. Be nice to these people. Because I've seen dudes do that. And I'm like, you're creeping me out, and I'm not even on the receiving end of it. Go and have fun, relax a little bit, or store those up and go home and make that face. Don't do it in
Right,
public,
right.
right? I appreciate you indulging that line of questions.
No, no worries.
Because, kind of like why we're talking, so we can get a better understanding of what's it like to make the movies happen in a very nuts and bolts sense. There's a lot of interesting things about how folks in different walks of life live what they do, how they adapt to the circumstances, what they learn from it, wisdom we might be able to appreciate from it. So I appreciate you sharing
Absolutely.
some of
That's where
that.
stories lie. You
Yeah,
know,
no lie about that.
I know a lot of writers, they'll start with the beginning of their stories. I've always been a fan of starting with what you want the audience to leave with and then working backwards, because now you're starting with the emotional response of the audience as the predicate rather than trying to build something that makes them feel. Start with what you want them to feel and then reverse engineer it through characters.
Hook them right off the bat.
Right.
Hit them with something of substance to make them go,
Hmm.
what was that? And then you got their attention. You might have learned some things working on these movies and all those stories you were writing. So what was your first job in the film industry proper? Like, so you've made it to Atlanta, you've done your program, your internship, you said that was a
Yeah.
Queen thing?
That was my first production job, but it wasn't my first job in the industry. Have you ever seen Logan Lucky?
I have not.
I have a scene in Logan Lucky with Daniel Craig. So Logan
Ooh.
Lucky was Steven Soderbergh's NASCAR heist movie. Channing Tatum, Seth MacFarlane, Daniel Craig, guy that played Kylo Ren, whose name is escaping me right now. And I was
Yeah.
taking my GFA classes at Pinewood, but I was working through one of these local background agencies. I got picked to be a background prisoner in a jail. Go figure. Big black guy prisoner.
Play to your strengths. Play the stereotypes. Hey,
But it was cool. They lined the second AD lined us up, and she like walked us into the cafeteria. A few seconds later, she came back. She grabbed me by my shoulder. She said, "You come with me." She stood me in front of the camera, and I was like, "Oh snap! I'm about to make the scene. I'm going to be in the shot." And then I'm feeling good, and the guy standing behind the camera, he's like, "Hey, can you move over this way?" I'm like, "Okay, okay." And then I turn and look, and Daniel Craig, probably about 50 pounds heavier than we've ever seen him in anything. And I think he did it on purpose. I'm not talking bad about Daniel Craig,
yeah.
but he was eating limp bacon, which I thought was crazy. It was limp, cold bacon, but I guess he was getting ready for character. And I recognized him. I was like, I didn't say anything because I didn't want to blow my chance. But there was Daniel Craig, and then the camera guy goes, "I need you to step to the." And so I did, and I looked, and it's Steven Soderbergh lining up his shot. That was my first job in the film industry, and I remember leaving there, coming home that day, thinking to myself, "That's a sign for you. That's a sign for you." So that was actually my first job in the film industry, which was actually as a background on camera. Then when I finished my program at GFA, my internship was on Finding Steve McQueen. But I felt at that moment, okay, I made a couple of right decisions here, because if I was still in Orlando floating around my pool hawking real estate, that would have never happened.
Dude, that's cool because that's a name director, does good stuff. You rattled off a bunch of name actors, including Adam Driver, and I'm a big
Adam
fan of that
Driver,
guy.
yes.
I haven't seen him give a bad performance. I've seen a bad movie that he happened to be in, but he wasn't doing bad. It was just the
Right.
movie itself. But that's cool, dude. That's
If you get
cool.
a chance, go check it out. You can see me. I'm on camera for like 35 seconds.
Yeah, no, I'm writing stuff down so I can go back and check on these things. That Logan Lucky, that is so cool, dude. I'm happy for you. So from there, camera assistant, production assistant, location manager, director, writer, all that stuff. So far, is there one of those that you've done more of than the others? Because I'm curious about how that's been for all of them, but what's the biggest one you've done?
Definitely worked more in the production department as a PA, as a non-union AD, even as a COVID compliance officer in the production department for Ozarks, the final season, which I got to learn a lot from, because the producers were very generous because they knew it was the last season. So they gave a lot of leeway for people to be in departments they shouldn't necessarily be in to get a holistic experience. And I love that about that show. But I would say definitely in the production department, which kind of prepared me for understanding the mechanisms of how shows get scheduled, run, produced. And then I bounced around as many different departments as I could along the way. One, just to get on set and get work. But two, I never graduated from my film courses in university, but they don't prepare you for the practical production experience anyway. It's theory, it's art, you just get all that stuff. So that was my film school. The first few years of my life in the film industry, worked locations, camera assistant. I just wanted to learn as much as I could to see how departments actually worked, knowing one day I wanted to own a production house where we did our own stuff. And knowing that I would struggle to try to put together the parts and pieces to make it happen, I wanted to see how it really worked on set. But definitely worked in the production department, probably more than anything else. I really like it. It's more suitable to my strengths, organization, communication, planning. Like I said, my mom was in the military, so I come from kind of a military mindset in that way. If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And that's something more suitable for the production department than props. You know what I mean? Props, a lot of those guys have art backgrounds, and because you got to understand period, textiles, costumes, fabrics, it's a lot of stuff in the art department that you have to have real grasp of. And I found from my previous professional experience, my talents were best suited for production, which was kind of cool.
And I think this is a very valuable experience for you to build up from, because you're doing the hands-on like technical work now, but as you do more and more directing work, I'm sure you're still going to have your hands dirty in doing the production stuff, but you know how it all works. You know
Yes.
what it can do. That's incredibly important for anybody that's in charge of anything, to know how each of the elements work, what they can do, what they can't do. And so that's good,
It
man.
goes to everything. It's like people know we shoot coverage, but do you know that every time the coverage changes, the world has to shrink from wide to medium to tight? That's 25 minutes to move the camera. So if you're planning a production day, every time you change a piece of coverage, you have to allot that amount of time. And that's all stuff you learn in the practical environment rather than in a school. So I call it my guerrilla warfare education. I'm one of those people, like, I don't just want you to tell me, I want to see for myself. And that was kind of my approach. Is like, I want to see. I don't just want to know what this one department, because quite frankly, in the union shows, an electrician can't pick up a microphone. A set painter can't move a light. So the departments are very segregated in that way. So unless you work in a couple of different ones, you really don't get to learn the lingo, the equipment, the kind of modus operandi of every department. You just kind of see it on the surface level, but I wanted to know more because I imagined buying my own equipment and what should I buy? What's the difference between a Cardellini and a Mayfair? What's the difference between an HMI light and LEDs? So I wanted to know that stuff. So that's why I went about it in that way. And knowing that I didn't finish my film courses, I was really desperate to find something that would make me valuable. And I thought at least knowing the basics of what the department does, somebody would bring me on as somebody green and train me up. In a lot of cases, that's what I found. Because these guys that's what they do. They are specialists. And a lot of times they look down upon people that bounce from department to department because you're not a tradesperson in that particular thing. But if you go in and ask a lot of dumb questions and show people you're willing to work, you'd be surprised how much they're willing to impart on you.
And in the modern job market situation, it seems like that college credential is getting less and less valuable because you don't necessarily know anything. You don't necessarily know how to do anything. Whereas the skilled trades, which is very much all over a film production, those are skills. A lot of those are highly technical jobs. Having experience, having a track record, having something to show for what you've been doing, I think that's probably more valuable. So I think that'll work out for you.
I've been enjoying it.
Good. Now, you already mentioned Ozark. When I was looking at the so far published CV you've got, one of the things that jumped out at me, like, oh, I know that one because I know at least a dozen people that have seen every episode of Ozark. And you worked on quite a few of those, as you said,
The
in the last
entire
season.
fourth season, yeah. And that was a double season. We shot for a full year during COVID. So we shot from October 2020 to October 2021.
That's a long
And
time.
it's a full year. It blew my mind. And that's one of the reasons I took the job, is because I don't have to look for work for a year. And in the film industry, that's like, butter on both sides of your bread. So I jumped in. I didn't care what the job was, but it actually turned out to be really cool.
Most film shoots, they're weeks long, right?
Yeah.
Maybe up to 6 months if it's a really brutal one. Is that
Mhm.
about
No,
fair?
that's about right. Like, you can shoot a feature in 20 days. Most features run about, I would say, 45 to maybe 70 days. And if you got a stunt spectacular or an action spectacular, it can run a lot longer because car chases and action scenes, they take multiple days to shoot. You don't get all your coverage for some of these big shootouts and car scenes in a day. So they can run a little bit longer. The average television show runs anywhere 4 to 6 months, but that's maybe 10, 12 episodes. That season we did of Ozark was a double season. I think it was a total of 16 episodes that they put out, but it was a full year of shooting for us. And COVID shutdowns for like sometimes weeks at a time.
But that's got to be a good experience because you get a lot of time on target. You don't have to keep relearning how different people do things because you're working with mostly the same people for that entire season.
Yeah, and what you do in that time is that amount of time gives you a chance to really know other. And I was a COVID compliance officer, so part of what we did was testing. Now, my job was specifically base camp, so the talent, the producers, and people like that. Other people did the general crew and like transportation or whatever. But over the course of that long, you get to know and meet other people in different departments. I had to know them all by face and name. I would check them in a couple different times a day. And that gives you the ability to go ask questions. That gives you an ability when you got a few, let's go hang out with the grips and see what's going on over there and see what we can soak up through osmosis or dumb questions. So yeah, I've made a lot of connects on that show. A lot of the people who helped fund the Duppy Man's Walk short were actually people that I worked with on Ozark because I was actually writing the short form of the script at that time and letting a few confidential trusted people read it when it came time to start raising funds for it because we self-financed it. $2,500 here, $3,000 there. Hey, you want to take a meeting with this guy? You know, blah, blah, blah. It jump started the Duppy Man.
That's awesome, dude. While it was an unfortunate time, if you were vigilant and eager, there are things that you could get ahead on during the COVID era. And in this case, it sounds like it was worked out in its own fashion for you. So did you spend a lot of time up the star's nostrils with those little swabs?
What my job was is to coordinate. We had our own nursing staff. We built our own rapid test labs. Ozark's COVID budget was ridiculous. But so we had epidemiologists on the team, and then we had a team of about 7 nurses. Our crew was massive. The crew was like 317 people. We had scheduled test days. Our jobs were basically to make sure they had PPE and sanitation materials, make sure that they were getting tested as part of the regimen. And for talent, that was 3 days a week. But anybody, like, say, we actually had John Boy from the Waltons come on set one day and be co-star in that season, and we would take him to rapid testing. So even though he wasn't in the normal testing protocol, we could come get him rapid tested, and then within an hour, we knew whether or not we could take him to set. So my job was kind of to be the first face they saw in the morning, to make sure they had their PPE, to make sure that they were being tested, to make sure anybody that came within certain zones of them were tested. It was a lot of fun. I got to get way closer to the talent than I had ever imagined. Basically, my job was making sure that talent and the above the line producers had everything that they needed on the regular basis for COVID compliance.
Okay. So besides that important job on set, are there some significant memories or stories you want to share with us about, say, what you were doing or some anecdote that happened while you were working on That Much Ozark?
Well, I do remember, forgot what month it was, but it was in the winter, and we were doing a scene where Navarro's private plane lands on like a private airstrip, and Marty has to go out and have this conference with him in his plane because he can't stay in America because he's like a fugitive or whatever, right? So we go out there to, I think it was in Dallas, Georgia. We go out to the airport, we shoot the scene, it starts flurrying, right? Snow flurries. And I said to myself, wow, this is kind of cool. So I see one of the producers, Dana Scott, she's walking back to base camp for whatever reason. And I said to her, this is going to look great on camera. And she was like, Greg, it's supposed to be August. And I thought that was the funniest thing ever because we had just spent the full day out there. And I'm looking around in awe, like all of us are on set, like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And I was like, this is going to be beautiful on camera. And she was like, Greg, it's supposed to be August. And I was like, oh. She's like, yeah, we'll be back for this. And sure enough,
Well,
we went back and had to go over and shoot it again.
do you think the audience is keeping track of time? It's still a cool shot.
That was so funny to me.
Oh, that's tough.
Those are a lot of good times on that show. Like I always enjoyed. So Julia Garner has a dog named Mr. Business. He's actually got like 2 million Facebook followers or whatever. And he's just this big white English bulldog. But I used to love walking Mr. Business and seeing him walk around because he was just so cool. And I thought this dog has more social media presence than I do. And that always blew my mind. But that show was a lot of fun. Really good people. It was a lot like they had been together for seasons. And one of the things, and maybe it's just my lack of experience, but one of the things I loved about Ozark was they brought people back season after season. So they were like a family, and they kind of adopted me for that one season. But you could see the genuine affection for people amongst cast and crew and all around on the set. And it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before on a set that I had worked on.
One of the things I want to say is that, yes, Mr. Business no doubt has more followers than both you and I put together. But Mr. Business doesn't have a job, and someone else is managing those accounts for him. Whereas every post on Instagram, you got to do, I got to do, every day we got to earn a check. He just has to be Mr. Business, and he's got handlers. If we had handlers, we might have that kind of following. So don't beat yourself up that Mr. Business got more than you.
Mr. Business is about his business.
He about that business. That's right. So how did you get to work on Ozark?
So dumb luck.
That works.
There's this website in Georgia where it's like the Georgia Production Hotline, and they list like, oh, this show's looking for this show's looking for that. So I applied for the Ozarks job as a PA. I did not get it. And then the Georgia Film Academy sent out a thing specifically looking for COVID compliance officers. And when I heard about the COVID positions, I went and took the training on like Coursera or something and got my certificates. And they called me I was like, oh, is this for the PA job? And she was like, no, this is for the COVID. And then she explained the job to me, and I was like, all right, cool. I mean, I'm fat, I'm black, and I'm bald, so I'm like high risk for COVID. You know what I mean? So I was a little leery at first, but when she was like, it's a year of work and this is the raid and this is the show, and I was a fan of Ozark, so I was like, yo, I'm down. And it was just dumb luck.
That's awesome. But you saw an opportunity appear that this COVID compliance officer thing was. You beat cheeks to get that certification, and then that's what got you there because you were willing to do whatever so long as you got to work on these productions. That's smart. That's hustle. I love it.
And it goes back to just trying to get on set. I gave up a career in real estate and restaurants to come to Atlanta and try to make this thing happen. Working in film industry isn't a full-time job. It is a gig-to-gig search. So I'm always trying to, like I was saying about the guerrilla warfare thing, just trying to learn as much as I could to make myself valuable, to take advantage of these types of opportunities. And I think the Georgia Film Academy sent out a link saying, hey, take this free COVID compliance course. And I did, and it worked out. It was just dumb luck.
Fortune favors the prepared.
Yes.
And you were prepared.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That was very cool.
And in no particular order, a couple of the other big titles that jumped out at me. Werewolf by Night. I've seen it, and I am disenchanted with the Disney Marvel movies at this point, as a lot of people are. But that one, I liked that one. I thought this is something different. There's a little more English on this ball. There's a little more style in this. I enjoyed that one. So I was glad to see that you worked on the one that I liked. So tell us about how you got involved and what you do.
So I was a day playing props assistant for about 2 weeks. Basically, my job was to be the runner between the Marvel's props warehouses here are massive. So think about every Marvel show you've ever seen almost. When they break down those sets, a lot of times they don't just toss them. They put them in warehouses in case they have to bring them back for whatever reason. So my job on Werewolf by Night was assisting the on-set and assisting the props assistant. So a lot of times I would just get in my car and drive back and forth to the warehouse. Like you said, I really liked Werewolf by Night too because it was a departure from that superhero stuff. And that departure, it kind of opened the Marvel world a little bit for me. I was hoping they were going to use that as a jumping off point for some of those guys that they introduced, and maybe they will eventually. But I didn't know what the show was when I took the job because Marvel, a lot of times you might not get a call sheet. And when you're a day player, a lot of times they just call you and tell you to be here. They don't tell you what's going on because of secrecy or whatever. But yeah, no, I actually saw it and I was pleasantly surprised, a lot like you. But the guy, the big blue guy that had the chains that the werewolf was protecting at the very end, I used to have to drive his head and chains back and forth. That's basically what I did for a few weeks. A friend got me on. That was the benefit of the networking because he said, hey, we need an assistant. And I was like, I'll be there.
Good. And one thing that stuck out about me about that movie was it was only about 50 or 55 minutes. It didn't try to pad to get to the full, say, hour and a half. It didn't try to pad to get to the 2 or 2.5 hour runtime that a lot of movies do these days. And I appreciated that. They told the story they needed to tell, and then they got out.
Yeah.
Because way too many movies these days take way too long to tell too little story. So
And it was very stylish. I liked the stylized look of it. They kind of started in black and white and then kind of moved you into the story. I really liked it. It's not my favorite Marvel film because I'm a big fan of Guardians of the Galaxy. I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed it. I was proud to be a part of it, even that little small part.
well, that's cool. Part of the cool cachet that it gets from me. All right, now it's assigned to Greg Fox.
That's
He's a little bit, maybe like 1% of the total 100% of cool. It's
right.
belongs to you.
I
Now,
appreciate
Jungle
that.
Cruise got some big names on that thing. What'd you do with that?
On Jungle Cruise, I was a second unit production assistant. An interesting story about Jungle Cruise, the gig was supposed to run about 2 months as a second unit PA, but about 4 days into the job, my wife had our daughter. And they cut me loose because I had a newborn. Not like you're fired, but like, hey, family comes first. Go be with your
Good.
daughter. But then later they called me back. Actually, one of the guys that was my AD for the second unit, he was actually one of the ADs on Ozark. So we got to work again later.
Good.
Yeah, that was fun.
So, what is it you did on it? What does that particular
So
job do?
a production assistant is basically a point of communication for the other departments. We assist in the logistics of keeping the show moving. A first AD's job basically is to run the show so the director can focus on the talent, the camera, and the creative elements. First AD's job is to keep the schedule running, put assets in places where they're supposed to be thinking ahead, be taking care of the administrative part. The second AD's job is to be his voice on set, and the PA's jobs is to be the voice of him everywhere else. So hey, do you need a battery for your walkie? Hey, this group of background extras needs to come be over here. Hey, it's time to go to lunch. Hey, lunch is over at 5. It's basically like a CQ, if that makes sense for people watching. It's basically a command center, and the AD production assistants are like the forward extension of that into all other places in the production, in the office, on the set, in the field. You know, sometimes we do things as simple as ask people not to walk right now because we're shooting, or sometimes we pass out call sheets. It's a lot of different things you do, but basically what you do is support the AD and the director.
Cool. I believe that would be a great value if when the director is ready to do this next scene, he or she just walks up to where it needs to be, says, "Are we ready? You're ready." And then he
Yes,
can do his job. Because if you're
yes,
not ready, he's going to ask why, and he's going to yell at somebody, and somebody's
right.
because somebody was too slow or something went wrong, and they don't want to hear excuses.
Right.
Uh,
And let me tell you something. If the director has to do that, that's the first AD's job. So the director never even has to think about it. The director will look at the first AD and be like, where are we going to next? Because the first AD already has it set up. And the first AD says, we got another 15 minutes here for coverage. Then we're going to move on to the next scene, the next shot, or whatever else. That's something that it took me a while to learn is the hierarchy. You know, the director runs the show, but the first AD is the project manager that keeps everybody else in place. And the PAs basically go forth with the commands, you know what I mean, to let everybody else know. Because the first AD, he's not even on walkie most of the time. That's what he has everybody else for.
And in the award shows, when Best Director gets awarded and the director goes up there and inevitably thanks the cast and the crew, they mean that. They could not have done what they just won an award for. Had all those little pieces not been taken care of, so they could move in and do their big value add there. But all those little pieces are important too.
Absolutely. Like one of the things I tried not to do, especially on set, I never say I. And you can ask people that have worked with me, that's something that they very rarely hear from me on set, unless it's like, I need to go pee or I got to make a call. But especially in situations where you're talking about the project as a whole, with me, it's never I, because you can't do it by yourself. I tried for years to do it by myself. Can't. And good directors know that. It's never really about them.
And Den of Thieves. What'd you do on Den of Thieves?
Production assistant, basically kind of the same thing. The unit that I was on specifically for that was another second unit, and it was the scene where they're moving all the money under the reserve. So all that money pushing and dressing up like they were police and all the stuff with the truck, all that stuff. At the Georgia World Congress Center, we shot it in their parking basement.
And you keep talking about Georgia because most films are actually made in Georgia as opposed to Hollywood. Or like, what's the percentage relative of what gets made in California versus what gets made in Georgia?
Percentage, I'm not sure, but I do know we've been number one in the world for like 7 of the last 10 years. We do more film and television than New York and Los Angeles combined. And the only place that beats us out when we do get beat is the country of Canada, because they have Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. But Georgia does a lot of film. And you know what it is? This is what I've come to realize. It's the architectural diversity, it's the topographical diversity, and nobody knows what the hell Georgia looks like. You go to LA, it's easily recognizable, but you only get one look. You get one or two looks. You get the valley or you get the coast. You go to New York, you get Manhattan or you get the outer boroughs, Brooklyn and the Bronx. And in Georgia, you got Savannah, you got Atlanta, which can be shot as any major city in the world from the right angles. You got the rural countryside where you go do something like The Color Purple or the Watchmen series that was on HBO. Dumb and Dumber 2 was filmed in Grantville, Georgia. I had no idea. But
I didn't know
it's
that
just,
either.
it's that type of diversity, especially the architectural and topographical. And we have 4 seasons. And, it boggles my mind, some of the films that now I know that they've shot in Georgia, because I would have never have expected it. And that's why, and the 35% tax incentive doesn't hurt. Anything over $1 million, 35% tax incentive, and they'll let you use it during the course of production instead of waiting to have to catch it at the end. And we're hoping that doesn't go away, because that's been important to what Georgia's been able to do.
Wow. So I bet it's already lower production costs because it's not California.
Right.
And then everything you were just talking about. So about the
Yeah.
only thing Georgia doesn't do is desert, right? Y'all can do most
Right.
everything else.
Right. But we got enough sound stages here that we could build you a desert, though.
Desert.
We can build a
Oh,
desert.
so I bet you know how to build a desert, don't you?
I do not, but I bet I know some. I could call some people and ask around.
So you've taken all this experience and that you continue to add to, and you've got this company called John Crow Films. What is John Crow Films?
We're actually John Crow Creative now.
Okay.
John Crow Films we used for our first short called Don't Go Home, She Knows. It was $1,200. We made it under the moniker of John Crow Films. We put it out. It's actually been in international streaming for like 8 years. Since we made it, it's been in international streaming. I'll actually send you a link to it so you can check it out yourself.
Thank you.
We became John Crow Creative because we saw ourselves less as a production company and more as an ideation bank. You know what I mean? We want to get into the ownership of IP rather than the physical nuts and bolts of production. I have no technical skill. I'm not going to lie. I'm not even going to pretend. I have very rudimentary understanding of a lot of the film stuff, but the most important thing that I've learned that's actually served me very well is find somebody who does. And my production partner, Tori Rogers, he has a company called Ratio Pictures, who we partnered with on the Duppy Man's Walk. And he's been my partner from the very beginning since I started here. But he does that. That's his world, cameras, technical expertise, all that. My idea is the ideation, the production scheduling, production management, and that type of thing. So I wanted to put myself in a position where I could help other people ideate and develop IP. And that's where John Crow Creative came from. And I let Tori now handle all the technical and production assets, the line crew production or the line production where he crews up, and because he's got teams and equipment. So I've kind of carved out what creative space I want to work in rather than trying to do too much simply because I want to produce something like a less is more deal. I can focus on what my skills lend to rather than trying to be out there in the world doing things that take me away from it.
Okay.
But John Crow Creative is the new John Crow Films. And basically what we do is ideate, develop, and hopefully create spec work that we can then go try to either bring to people to scale up into features and series, or simply just work with people that need help as a consultant.
So the John Crow part of the name, where does that come from?
So John Crow comes from the Caribbean. You know those big turkey vultures?
Yeah.
In the Jamaica, in the Caribbean, they're called John Crows. So a John Crow, to me, what I took from the John Crow is, if you see a buzzard, the first connotations that come to mind are negative. Oh my God, look at that buzzard eating that dead flesh over there. But the truth is that buzzard keeps the ecosystem healthy. that buzzard is something that without its presence, the balance falls out of place. And that's what the idea around the type of stories that we want to tell comes from. And that's why I adopted John Crow, is because we don't all get a chance to tell our stories because people see little value in them sometimes. But we're going to continue telling these types of stories because without these stories in the ecosystem of the types of narratives that we get, we don't get the balance that we need. And that's why I kind of adopted the John Crow as John Crow Creative, because your story might not be what's selling or what's been requested or what's being asked for, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. And those are the types of stories that we want to tell. I'm not a big fan of superhero stuff because I think it devalues the human experience. You know what I mean? It kind of curtails the value we see in each other because none of us are superheroes, but we all want to pretend. You know what I mean? And John Crow is kind of the opposite of that, where we want to tell stories that have deeply rooted, what's a good word? I don't know.
Authentically sourced.
That too, because we want to tell the lesser known powerful stories. You know what I mean? Like, well, there's a lot of rehashing: boy beats girl, boy loses girl, blah 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 blah.
Yep.
I want to hear stuff different than that. I want to step outside Plato's dramatics and actually tell story of people don't know they want to hear. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want that buzzard in your yard, but if you see him out there eating something, you know he's doing something for you. It's like those mosquito hawks. Nobody really wants them floating around their house, but if they're keeping mosquitoes away, you know, leave it be. And that's kind of where John Crow Creative came from. It's just the idea that you might not like what you're seeing, but these things are important for balance. And we don't necessarily tell stories people don't want to see or hear. We just go about deciding on what we choose to invest our time developing and ideating with that mentality in mind.
And I'm glad you've got that as a goal, because one thing that I know I'm not the only person who's noticed this is that since at the latest, the mid-aughts, it seemed as though new stories started drying up in cinema. Hollywood was putting out fewer and fewer things that were different outside of a mold. They wanted safe, they wanted predictable, they wanted an algorithm to design
Yes.
everything for them. But I remember when me and my brother in the 90s and early aughts, we'd go hit up the movie theater all the time for all kinds of off-the-wall movies, like The Secretary. So that's not a usual movie. You know, Maggie Gyllenhaal getting caned over a desk, that's something different. And there was all kinds of experimental stuff going on then, and they were lower budget, and that's fine. You don't need a big budget to do everything, but it seems like there's not much to go around for that kind of movie these days, and Hollywood's experiencing the pain of that because
Yeah.
they've been too reliant on the stuff you're talking about, the big plastic fantastic movies that they think are going to make $1 billion a hit. And
Right.
a few of them might, but not all of them are. And then you get a blast from the past like Top Gun Maverick that does make $1 billion because it's something we haven't seen in a long time.
Right.
And that was one of the things that we talked about when you were kind enough to come down to Mobile for the film festival and give that talk, is that I appreciated you for doing it, and you were glad I appreciated you for doing it, of telling a different story.
Yeah.
You were telling an original story, and it
You
was so
know,
glad to see.
that is the thing that I am most disappointed with about where the film industry is still headed, because the studios don't have any plans on changing. And when you say algorithm, you hit it on the head. That's why AI, they're so desperately waiting the onset of AI. When you and I used to go to the movies, there was always something creative, groundbreaking, original, you know. But what Hollywood has come to understand, especially with like soaring production costs, they don't want creativity anymore. What they want is reliability. So Hollywood's thing is, give me what I know is a hit already, but different. So that's kind of the lane that they've decided to go down. But to them, it means more sequels. It means more prequels. It means more reinvention of old properties that they're bringing back to life. Like, I love Ghostbusters, but I don't need another one.
I
You know
don't.
what I mean?
I
I don't
don't.
need another one. I
And
love The Color Purple, but whoever said it should be a musical, they need to be caned. Because first of all, Alice Walker would roll over in her grave if she heard people singing. You know, I mean, that's just my opinion. Don't send me letters. I'm just saying. But like, some of it is just it's in bad taste. They've stopped looking at us as an outlet for their creative endeavors, and they just see us as a pile of money. And they don't necessarily have to satiate our desire for the willful suspension of disbelief. They just got to give us product. And that's the
Yeah.
thing that it's aggravating.
Yeah.
It's aggravating.
Me and my wife, I'm fortunate to be married to a lady who's maybe more versed in movies than I am. And that's saying something. But we like to go to the movies, and we like physical theaters. We like the experience. We want to keep that going. We bought some of those AMC shares, and I periodically buy more because I believe in them as a company, and that they do great things. The cinematic experience is important. It helped form us as who we are. But I tell you what, when I'm sitting in the previews and I see another trailer for another possessed nun movie, I'd tell her, another possessed nun movie, like another evil nun. Ooh, another one. How can we do that? Come on, possess somebody else. Possess,
Right.
do another possessed dog. I mean, like Cujo, that was original, right? Do something
That was
different.
it.
Just
Yeah,
not another nun.
I agree.
For those watching, if you do want to send Greg hate mail, you have my permission, but you need to put a check in there too.
Yeah,
And the 4 line is the production of the Duppy Man Walks,
very good.
feature film. So feel free to badmouth them, but you pay for the privilege. That's all I'm saying.
Hate on me. Hate on me. I need hate in my life right now.
So you've directed 3 short films so far: Delgaum, Don't Go Home, She Knows, and Duppy Man's Walk. Duppy Man's Walk, I saw at the film festival. I enjoyed it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find where to watch the other 2. So I just got to ask you for more information about that, because I'm curious to see what it is you've been working on. Have you only directed 3 at this point, or were there some more that IMDb missed?
So the Delgum was a 48-hour film project that a friend of mine asked me to direct for their team. Don't Go Home, She Knows was a John Crow Films project. Same thing pretty much with the Duppy Man's Walk, but there's another one called The Annunciation, which never made it to distribution. And that's basically a Christmas story about a guy that wakes up after a bender on Christmas Eve and he's got a baby in his house. And it was kind of a comedy, but we had a lot of issues around the use of the minor, and the editor was the minor's father, and he didn't kind of like the way it came out, so it never made it to air.
Oh, man. Yeah. You want to err on the side of caution when
Oh,
that comes up,
absolutely,
don't you?
absolutely. That was before my student film, so that literally was the very first thing I ever made, and it's not that great, but it was the foundation of the team that we ultimately put together that has been a part of all the other shorts that we've done. And now who are my partner, Tori, and a couple of other heads involved are the ones driving the feature project.
So unfortunately, was it renunciation? Is that what you said it was?
The Annunciation, like you remember the picture of the Annunciation of Christ with the beam coming down, and we called it the Annunciation because it was a Christmas movie about a baby.
Gotcha. Okay. So while I get where we might not ever get to see it because of, parent-child issues, and I respect that, is the script something you might ever release so people could take a look at it?
We didn't have a script. It
Well,
was
that
it was
answers that question.
it was more of a camera exercise than anything. I wanted to see if I could put into practice the things that I had learned about depth of field, use of thirds, things like that, using the camera as an instrument, even though I wasn't operating the camera. But I wanted to, a lot of what I do is proving to myself that I'm not a fraud. You know what I mean? It's kind of bit by bit. Education without practical application of it is useless, right? So really what I wanted to do was just see if I could work with the DP in a way that was compelling visually. So the script was pretty bare bones. It was just me and a couple of my friends, one of which who's a stand-up comedian, and he was kind of protagonist of it. So there was a lot of freestyling. I purposely kept it as minimalist as possible with dialogue because I wanted it to be about the visuals and trying to see if I could use them. That's really what it was. I think there's probably like 20 lines of dialogue in the whole thing. And even in Don't Go Home, She Knows, I think there's maybe like 60 pieces of dialogue because people kept telling me your story should be able to move without the use of dialogue. So that's what I was kind of working on at that point.
So it was more of a technology test rehearsal kind of situation as opposed to a real short film that you intended to make. to pour your heart into this work of art
Right.
situation. Okay. And that is a valuable use of your time. Folks at home, if you're doing something important, rehearse it, dry run it. It will help you work out the kinks down the line. I do it all the time because in my day job, I do a lot of instruction. And when I've got my material prepared, I rehearse it for somebody before I deliver it to 700 people. And it always helps.
It was a learning experience, and again, just proving to myself this is something that you can do.
So the Delgaum, that was, you said, a 48-hour film festival challenge. And what's it like being in one of those? I've heard it's a meat grinder. You don't get much sleep, stuff like that.
It was fun for me. So one of the young ladies that was a GFA student along with me, she and a friend of hers came out to help us make the Annunciation. So after the Annunciation and that film experience, they joined the 48-hour film thing, and she wanted me to come be her first AD, the person that actually kind of keeps the production moving. But when I got there, she was like, I don't think I can do this. Why don't you go ahead and direct? So I didn't have any input in the script. There are certain things that you have to use. Like you have a category, and then they give you like certain things that you have to have in it. So I didn't have anything really to do with it. I got there, I spent a little bit of time reading the script, and then Tori, he and I just kind of winged it. But it actually turned out it wasn't bad. I mean, it wasn't bad at all. The young lady that actually owns the rights to it, she's decided not to put it into release, but I have it as well. No, it was fun. It was kind of a challenge because you got 48 hours. And if you think about it, that's only a day to shoot and then a day for post. Now, we had some benefits. There was a company here called Georgia Crickets who lent us their facility. One of their team members, this is her business, and she was like, it'll be cool if we just shot it at my place. It was a big warehouse, bunch of insects and all kind of stuff like that. But we had a sci-fi theme. So basically, the Delgum is a time machine, and these people come back from a future to the cricket house, and from a future where there's famine and in the future, and they want to bring back crickets because they're a good source of protein. So that was kind of the premise of the script. It was a comedy. We had a boa constrictor, we had a horse, we had a bunch of crickets, we had time travelers. It was actually pretty fun. It was a lot of fun. It came out way better than I imagined.
That's good. And films, whether they're short or feature length, for me to enjoy them, they don't have to be perfect technically, and they could have a lot wrong with them. But if I can find the spark that inspired people to want to make this thing, I can groove with that.
Right.
Because one of the genres I know best is old school blaxploitation. And those folks usually had no budget. They
Right.
usually didn't know what they were doing. They just were excited, maybe had some speed, and they went out and made it. But they made some really enjoyable stuff.
No, they
And
absolutely did.
stuff that's worth watching. I grew up watching Mystery Science Theater 3000, so you got all these B movies, and some of them they're just boring and terrible, but some of them they're terrible but in the right way. So it ain't got to be perfect for me to dig it. Is that something you can share with me and with
Yeah,
the audience? Like, will I be able to like link
I
that for
could
people to
ask for
see?
permission. Yeah, I'm sure. I've been
Okay.
trying to get her to release it for a long time, and I think so. We were able to find some distribution channels. I don't think she's ever explored them, but I could definitely ask, and I don't think she'd have a problem with it.
Okay, good. Because that's one of the things I like to do is bone up on the material of the people that I'm going to be interviewing.
Got
And
it.
fortunately for me, I saw the Duppy Man walks at the film festival. So I had the most important thing we're going to talk about. And I get why that's not more widely available right now because it's still on the film festival circuit. You have to keep it restricted. But I like to show people something if they're interested in the artists that we're talking to.
The Duppy Man's Walk, we're actually gearing up to do a public release of it here, maybe in like September, October-ish. Use the Halloween season to get some legs behind it. But that's something that we're definitely talking about doing now. But the Delgum, I could probably get you. Don't Go Home, She Knows I could get you for sure. And I'm going to release that publicly on YouTube here probably in the next month. So I'll give you in advance of some of these that you could use for your viewers.
That'd be great. And Don't Go Home, She Knows. So you directed, but you also wrote that one, right?
Yes. I'm a writer
So
by
it,
trade. Directing is something I do so that other people don't impede on my vision.
you bake it into the script so people can't
Right.
argue with you about it.
Yeah.
I like
But
it.
Don't Go Home, She Knows is a story about a cheater, basically, who can't get on with past relationships because his wife committed suicide. There's some foreshadowing that we didn't get the days to shoot it, but in the script, you get to see it in flashbacks. So at their anniversary dinner, his wife has recently had a miscarriage, but at the dinner restaurant, one of his female friends comes and confronts him at that moment. Wife leaves, goes home. She's overcome with grief. She kills herself. Flash forward years later, he's trying to get on with other relationships, but he can't because every time he does, his wife's spirit intervenes. You got to see it. I'll actually send it to you because I'll send you the trailer and some other stuff. But the whole idea is that I think the tagline was a life of infidelity leads to an afterlife of revenge. But that was basically the story. And it's kind of creepy, kind of eerie, but not a lot of dialogue. And it's another kind of one of those visually driven stories.
Yeah, I saw the trailer for it. It left me wanting to know what else we got going on here. What's going to happen? What does all this mean? I did pick up on some of what you mentioned, though. That's good. The trailer was effective. But we talked about writing what you know, life experience of this and that. Did you have a real life inspiration for what you wrote here, or was this just an interesting story that popped in your head?
So Don't Go Home, She Knows. I've never had anything like that happen to me.
Well, good.
But the idea behind it is you can't take it with you. You know what I mean? And the idea behind it was you can't take it with you because he was so selfish in life. He thought he would always have this type of ability to womanize and to just have everything he wanted at all times. But when you betray people in certain ways, some of that you carry with you. You know, you remember when we were little, we would run through the fields and you'd end up with all those little stickers on your socks? That's kind of the idea, is nothing comes without consequences. All contact has some type of transference. You know, there's some kind of theory in physics that, like, anytime two things engage, there's transference of some sort. This was my idea of playing with that. And the transference that he gave being the dog that he was to her, it wasn't something he could live without paying the price for. That transference stayed with him, and that's where the idea came from.
Pretty deep, but universal,
Yeah.
because men around the world and throughout history might have done things like this. It is
Mhm.
allegedly it's happened.
And women too. It's kind of like the jilted lover thing taken to the extreme.
Yep. And then a ghost story.
Right.
People like ghost stories,
I've
which takes
found
us.
the quickest way to willful suspension of disbelief is the things that we are afraid of, because we don't know everything that we're afraid of. So if you can get the hook in them and get them to follow you down the rabbit hole, fear can come in a lot of different ways: physical, emotional. If you're a young writer or director, content creator, and you're exploring genres to work with, comedy is hard, buddy. And it does not travel well. Like, what's funny in Cleveland is not funny in Los Angeles. You know what I'm saying? Romance, twice as hard as comedy, but sci-fi and horror, they're good vehicles for the willful suspension of disbelief. And the first thing a writer should want to do is give you a roller coaster ride, in my opinion. And that comes with the willful suspension of disbelief. So if I can play on your fears, if I can play on anxiety, if I can play on your imagination of the things out in the world or in the universe, those are fertile ground for stories that could be about anything or anybody, rather than romance, which always has to be about the cute guy and the hot chick and, you know, the bar or the diner. They really get pigeonholed and plugged into certain theatrical and narrative elements. But sci-fi, horror, dark comedy, you can play with anything and anybody.
Yeah, I guess you're right, aren't you? Because I remember seeing back in about the mid-aughts a German teenage comedy sex romp zombie movie. And even though, I mean, I speak a little bit of German, but not near enough to keep up with those people. And their senses of humor are much more blunt. They tend to not be as nuanced. I mean, they can deliver a good joke. It's not going to be Norm Macdonald. It's going to be more like a Dumb and Dumber, like you had mentioned.
Yeah.
But the movie still worked because it had parts in it that I recognized. I could appreciate what they were doing. And then I got to see what those other little parts of how they tell a story and how they portray characters in a film that helped me understand, okay, so this is how Germans do this. And it was an enriching experience. Okay, I get you. But the horror helped me get in the door to understand what's going on. So Don't Go Home, She Knows. How long did that take to make?
We shot 2 days and then it was in post for like 3 months. The whole thing is, I think it's 15 minutes minutes, 54 seconds. But it only took 2 days to shoot. We shot at my apartment, we shot at my friend's house, and the rest of it was basically just in my apartment. The whole thing cost $1,200. And
That's
that's
pretty impressive.
gas, food, everything. You know, it was, again, guerrilla warfare filmmaking. Basically, every background actor that I knew that could act, I called them up like, hey, you want to be in this? Oh, yeah, is there a script? Yeah, but don't worry about it because there's not that much dialogue. And then again, it became a visual exercise. But since we made it, we were on Amazon for 2 years as a short film. We were with Reveal for like 2 years. We were with Nightmare Reel for like a year. And now we're in South Asia for 10 years with Gola Films in 20 different languages. So that little film had legs that long. I can't wait to see the type of response that the Duppy Man gets because it's a far better piece of work, both artistically and technically. But the success of Don't Go Home, She Knows really is what broke us from being John Crow Films to being John Crow Creative, because we realized even though we're trying to make stuff you don't normally see, people want to see it. You know, it was outside of the conventional norms of, I mean, it's a horror short, but the story itself, you don't see a lot of stuff like it. And that really helped us. And we were surprised the legs it had. And that's really what put the fire underneath us to start doing bigger things. We've always been ambitious, but that was the one that said to us, again, just proved we weren't frauds. And every time you know you're not a fraud, it makes you that much more excited to try to move to the next level.
That's cool, dude. I didn't know about all the exposure that that short of yours has gotten. I'm glad to hear it. That's really good. So, when back in the day, a joke might be that, I suck in the US, but I'm huge in France, or like they love me in Japan. So, you could say that in South Korea. Greg Fox.
Yeah, we don't have we don't have like gargantuan number of views, but we got like 2,600 in India. We got like another, I think altogether it doesn't get a ton of views, not the numbers that I'm getting, but it was been out there for so long. We've just kind of just washed our hands of it. Like, we're not going to really chase it down. If you want it, you can have it, because what it did on its own was enough to bring attention to us to say that, you know what, this would give it to the public now and just let it be out there. So when people do Google us, that's something that they can find and watch for free, potentially wherever they are. So it's kind of like being our brand ambassador out there in the world.
Now you got a new flagship product that you're pushing. You already made the proof of concept and you're working on getting the feature length made of it. And that's the Duppy Man's Walk, which I reviewed, and I highly encourage people to go back and check out my review. And when they get the opportunity to see it, to check it out for themselves. Now there's quite a story that goes with the making of this thing. So please share that with the audience because I found it interesting. I bet they will too.
So the Duppy Man is it's kind of like our first full-throated foray into dialogue and visuals. You know what I mean? It's a very rich story with kind of a cloverleaf structure where we go back and forth between the past and the present to tell the story of a family reclaiming a lost homestead in the South Georgia swamp. And with it comes the remnants of the tragedy and violence that happened there before, and it's embodied by the Duppy Man. The feature script has been done since 2017. We actually went out into the world and shopped it for a while with development companies. A couple of companies were interested, but they just couldn't wrap their minds around what these rural Southern characters should look and feel like in tone. It was written as authentically as it could, and you got a chance to meet my cousin, so that character that she plays, that ain't a character. That's cousin. You know what I mean? But when you see the words on paper, it's a very fine line, especially when you're talking to development execs that don't necessarily come from the same backgrounds, the same part of the country, or the same type of life experience. It was a fine line between it being Amos and Andy and being what we created it to be. And that was the challenge that we got caught with first. And after about a year of that, I just said to myself, man, it'll take me less time to go out and make something than it will for me to try to get here and explain to you why it's important. So we did. My mother has some acreage in South Georgia, and the story actually all takes place there. My mother was in the military. She retired to this little town in South Georgia where her family has been for generations. And I didn't understand it. And I was like, you've been around the world a couple different times. Why in the world you choose this little podunk in Georgia? She explained, because this is where our family's roots are. So I finally get a chance to come up and see it for the first time. And it's this big, sprawling property filled with like 100-year-old cypress trees and Spanish. Like, it was amazing, blew my mind. But everywhere I went on the property, I felt like people were watching me and speaking to me. And it kind of creeped me out, but it was more familial and familiar than it was creepy. So I started kind of just letting it work on me, and then spent a couple of days there, came back to in Atlanta, and I couldn't get the story out of my head. So I sat down and I wrote it. And the story is fictitious, but it's something that happened in that part of the country to countless families. There's a little bit of history thrown in that helps set the stage for like actual history, to help set the stage for the fictional narrative we tell. But the Duppy Man's Walk is our first real shot at doing something that we think is important. The feature, we're going to get it off the ground here eventually, but the short itself is your introduction to this world. And what we did that I thought was smart, because it was my idea, we didn't give you anything from the feature. In the feature, there's a line where one cousin is talking to another about why their brother isn't there. So the question is, why isn't our cousin here for this family gathering that's important after we're reclaiming this land after 100 years? And the answer was, he doesn't come out here anymore because he had a bad experience. So what we did is we took his story and told that as the introduction to the world, the myth, and the mythology, rather than giving you a compressed version of the feature.
Oh, so that's how that fits into the greater scheme of things. So I
Yeah.
saw why he doesn't want to go out there anymore.
Yes,
And he
yes.
did have a bad experience. He really
Yes, he did.
did.
Yes, he did.
And what
But
kind of budget did you have for this thing? Because it looked good.
well, I mean, we spent some money now. We did a fundraising course, friends and family, and we were able to come up with about 17 grand that way. And then production partners and myself, we came up with all the other stuff for finishing and post. But the budget in total, if you include festival entries, was like 38 grand. And the thing that made it expensive was everybody traveled from Atlanta 4 hours to the swamp. We shot this in the Okefenokee region, some in the swamp itself, but mostly on my mom's land. But Waycross, Georgia is probably 4 hours away from Atlanta. We traveled everybody, 25 members of cast and crew, put them up in Airbnbs. Everybody got union rates and per diem. It was during COVID as well. It was the back end of COVID. So some of the COVID restrictions had been lifted, but this was like 2021, 2022 we did this, I think. So it cost some money to do, but we really believed in the project, and we knew that once people see the proof of concept, it will bring a relevance to the script and to the production plan for the feature when they see it in a way that shows them why this is important.
The actors that you got to play in it, they did a good job. Like your cousin you mentioned, she brought a unique voice to the screen, and one that should be featured more. When you're talking about the people that you're pitching it to, not really understanding how this fits into basically their worldview. That strikes me as a kind of cultural chauvinism on their part. This isn't something I know. I don't know what to do with it, and I'm not going to try that hard either. It's that
Right.
aversion to new ideas we were talking about earlier, because there's all kinds of interesting stories all over the world and in all these different little subcultures. And I'm originally from the South, mostly Tennessee, but I went to officer school in Fort Benning, Georgia, and now I live in Florida. I was stationed in Louisiana. There are different cultures from all over the place. And I guess they're comfortable with stereotyping and making fun of Cajuns. They're fine with that. But if you want to
Bobby
have
Boucher.
some Bobby Boucher, there you go. But they don't really know what to do with other folks. That's unfortunate. Again, it's that lack of imagination and that lack of willingness to learn about other people and relate to them. And it stinks.
My experience has been that they don't necessarily value the voices because they look at it as product, right? And so what they want to do is reach the largest number of potential screens. And to do that, they think that they need to curate whose voices get magnified. And that's what I kind of got from my experience with it is, oh, we really love the story, but how is this going to play in Chicago or to predominantly white audiences in the Pacific Northwest?
Mm-hmm.
Apparently pretty good, because Duppy Man's Walk is screened in all those places. But if you don't find value in the product that you would potentially produce, you don't spend a lot of time putting money into the development of it. That was
Yeah.
my takeaway from it. The cultural chauvinism, your words, very good words. I don't want to use them.
No,
Not
they're
because I
mine.
don't
They're
believe
mine.
them, that's the way it is. Like the South has a rich storytelling tradition. The South has the greatest storytellers that ever lived, a lot of them. I mean, first of all, Baltimore is below the Mason-Dixon, so technically Edgar Allan Poe was a Southerner. You know what I'm saying? Tennessee Williams, Alice Walker, everybody says Mark Twain, but Mark Twain, the rich storytelling tradition. But how often do we actually see ourselves on the big screen or our stories on the big screen?
Yeah.
And not like Black Snake Moan or Monsters Ball or The
Waterboy.
Waterboy. One of the films that I loved was Three Billboards Over Ebbing, Missouri. You know what I'm talking about?
I've heard of it. I
Francis
didn't see it though.
McDermott. You should check it out because that story could have easily been done in the South. It was small, it was intimate, it was powerful. And we have tons of stories like that here. We just don't have the opportunity to have our voices magnified to big stages like that.
And I think that whoever is not quite buying into your pitches, they're ignoring a few things. Like one, well, True Blood was a big hit and it played
Mhm.
heavy on Louisiana culture. There's one thing that's related to the kind of patois that your cousin portrayed and the
Yeah.
the dirty South, very humid environment, kind of uncomfortable setting that your story set in. But also Beasts of the Southern Wild, the
Yes,
most memorable part of that was the untrained actors that gave some heartrending performances in it. So if it worked there, why won't it work here? You
that's
know?
true.
And that was a big hit amongst film aficionados.
Yeah.
So haven't seen your short and haven't seen Beasts of the Southern Wild, you would definitely make a better movie than what they did. Because I thought like the acting was good, but overall I thought the movie was pretty bad.
Mhm.
But having seen what you put out, no, I would trust you far more
Yeah, I
with the feature lead.
appreciate it.
Yes, sir. But Duppy Man, that's another connection to the Caribbean to
Yes.
go along with the John Crow thing. So why don't you familiarize folks with what the Duppy Man is?
In the Caribbean, a duppy is a spirit. A duppy is like saying like a ghost or a phantom or a specter. Somebody might say, there go a duppy. You know what I mean? And a duppy is basically a spirit. They can be malevolent or benevolent, but it's usually a person. It's not a demon or some unhuman spirit or whatever. The duppy is somebody that lived the earth, walked the earth at some point. I'm from Florida originally, but a lot of my father's family is from the Bahamas. My mother's family is from Georgia for the most part, but via Trinidad and Tobago. And when you grow up on the east coast of Florida, everybody you know is Haitian, Jamaican, Bahamian from the island. So as growing up, even probably you, we have a very rich oral storytelling tradition in the South that doesn't get enough attention. And growing up as a child, hearing all these different stories from these different Caribbean cultures, I kind of fell in love with the mythology of it. Part of the John Crow thing, having its connection to the Caribbean, is the idea that these voices go unheard. The Duppy in our story is actually a former acquaintance of the family, is kind of like the unrecognized witness
Yeah,
because
yeah.
Duppies continue to walk because they have unfinished business. And I don't want to go too far into it, but this guy, one of the themes of the Duppy Man's Walk is some things you can't unsee. And when you can't unsee things, they haunt you. That's kind of the premise of our Duppy Man story. The feature length version, it actually becomes instrumental to unwinding and revealing to the family its own history. As these people reclaim this property, the connection to the Duppy actually has them walking in the footsteps of the past. And in walking in the footsteps of the past, the younger generation get to learn of their history and of the family on the land. And it's something that that generation had no idea about. So it becomes this coming of age story about a young man learning about his family through a 100-year-old ghost story that he gets caught up in. And that's what the feature really is.
Speaking of the flashback that happens in your short film, I was particularly struck by the strength of the shadows and how the play of the light and the dark in those scenes really comes across strong. And I love how you shot that. So good
I
job.
will pass that on to my partner, Tori. He will love to hear that.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
as the DP, it's all his cameras, it's all his lighting equipment. We had a production designer that helped us with some elements of the visual fabric, but I'll pass it on to Tori and he'd love to hear it. He's really good at what he does.
Yeah, because lighting on its own can tell a story. Now you can
Yes,
add to it, but it can tell a story and it can shape a story. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I liked it. And you mentioned again about the South being legendary storytellers. A lot of Southerners are of Scotch-Irish descent, and the Scottish and the Irish are some of the most gifted storytellers, musicians
Mm,
in world history. So, yeah, there's another wrinkle in addition to the ones you already pointed out.
absolutely.
And Southerners, I mean, I guess statistically, we tend to be pretty violent, and violent people have stories to tell, and they love telling them. We get in a bunch of stuff. There's a reason Florida man is a thing, and
Right.
Cajun man is a thing. We're interesting.
Very true. And it's funny because you were talking about the lighting, but I think, especially in the Duppy Man's Walk the Short, we tried to make the environment as much of a character as we could because it tells a story in itself. You just put the characters in it. But maybe that's why Southerners are such good storytellers because the landscape, the swamps, the salt air, it all lends to kind of those like visceral and emotional connections that we take in and make memories from. And that's why we thought it was important for the landscape and the swamp itself to play a big role in the story that we told.
I liked it. So I look forward to more of it. Now, are you going to be doing any sort of Indiegogo, Kickstarter? What kind of options for financing are you looking at as you move forward into the future with the Duppy Man?
I have considered stripping. Um, I have
Well, did you
considered
pay
stripping.
attention while you worked at the strip
Um,
club to techniques and
I did, but I mean, until somebody comes up with a fat guy strip club, like I'm out of luck.
big
But
bears?
what?
Eh, there's a lot of
OnlyFans.
money in Atlanta. There's a lot of people who like different things in Atlanta. Just saying. You can use the name, that's free.
That's something to think about. But we will. We're trying. So right now we're getting the business plan all squared away. We wanted to get our festival run done so that as we pitched it, we would have some type of bona fides. And right now we're doing some team building around producers, production designers, because we need to add value to the vision. Because I would be a first-time feature director. That's a gamble in itself. So I'm team building with the other experienced heads so that we're adding some value to the production and it looks like something worth people putting money into. We do plan on doing some crowdfunding as part of a multi-pronged strategy of maybe some equity investment, maybe get on the Film Angels network. The budget came back at 1.94. We probably think we can do it for less, but we're going to see what we can do. But something like that is coming. I think I'm going to look into Seed and Spark because I heard there's a lot of other types of resources built into the platform for distribution and some other stuff down the line. But for right now, shoring up the team, making sure that the business plan and projections are solid, make sure that we're at the end of our festival run, we're going to start finding ways to release it and get it out into the bloodstream. We think we've proven that we have a market. We just have to prove it to other people. So what we want to do is see what kind of value we can add through a good festival run. And then we're going to try to find somebody to get us legally squared away. And then we'll see what we can do. We really need an experienced financial producer on board. And that's really what we're searching for right now.
Gotcha. Skills and connections. You
Mm,
never have too many of them, right?
right.
Asking you about Southern Gothic. The material says that influenced Duppy Man's Walk.
Southern Gothic is what we decided to call it because it had supernatural elements without being grotesque horror. And Southern Gothic best described to us that homage that we wanted to pay to the oral storytelling tradition of the American South. So Southern Gothic was just some pretty verbiage we put together to make it work, but it does a good job in describing the story as a whole. Southern people basically rehashing their history through the oral storytelling tradition, and that's how we came up with Southern Gothic.
Oh, it's an actual genre. That's why I was curious. All
Oh,
right.
it is.
Let
When for
me,
us, we didn't know that.
in the production of Duppy Man's Walk and looking at the credits, I didn't see a casting director. Did that just devolve to you? And so it was you finding all the people to do that, or did your friend Tori do it?
Now, Tori basically handles all the technical aspects, and then he hands off all the front end creative and team building to me. So I hooked up with a website called Actors Access. Like, we know a bunch of different types of actors at different levels here in Atlanta. So we asked them, how do you guys get get gigs. And we had worked with a few of these companies before when we casted some of the other shorts. I found out very early I could become a SAG signatory for micro budget films under, I think it's like under 50,000, and they give you a set day rate. So when we were looking for talent, we were always looking to work with professionals. With the Duppy Man in particular, and all the other ones, I go to my actor friends, hey, where do I need to go? Oh, Actors Access, oh, here, oh, here. And then we linked up with a few casting agencies that some of the people work with. And we went through about 300 different audition tapes for the Duppy Man, because now everything is basically done via internet. So they'll self-tape. You send them the sides, they'll self-tape, and then they can self-submit. And that's kind of what we did. We found Robert Yata and knew we had a foundation with him. Oh, Tyler Webb as well. Tyler is actually a guy who I got a chance to work with before, so I reached out to him, but he was on there, and everybody else was just actor friends or family. And I was like, you know what? You're not an actor, but you embody this particular thing. So come aboard, let me work with you, I'll pay you. And that's how we cast it up on this one.
So that's another thing to add to your CV, casting director. And you wear many hats. That's all right. Were there any additional anecdotes or trying experiences on the production of making the Duppy Man walks?
Quite a few, actually. I mean, because we had money. One of them is we contracted to have a 1.5-ton grip truck. We were going to pick it up in Atlanta. We were going to drive it down to Waycross. We were going to have it for a certain number of days. On the way, that truck broke down. So we had to come up with a different contractor and get it there on time because our days were limited. And I'm already paying for Airbnbs and all this other stuff. So we ended up with a Sprinter van full of stuff rather than a truck, and we made it work. And it didn't really affect what we were able to capture, but it affected the systems that we had. Stabilizers in particular, we were supposed to have a jib, we were supposed to have dollies, supposed to have steady cams. We ended up with a steady cam, but it was rickety. We had to cut away some shots that were just not stabilized properly. So we just roll with the punches. One thing about working with the idea of guerrilla warfare filmmaking is you find a way to make it happen. And Tori's really good at putting technical assets in the proper places to get the right visual fabric from it. So we didn't have a boat. We had the canoe scene planned out in the script. We had worked through a bunch of different ways to get out on the Little Satilla River. Insurance said, if you're going to put people out here in open water, running water, you need to have a rescue team. You have to have the boat for the scene, and you need to have a rescue team if possible. So we had to get rid of the running water idea. But luckily, right around the corner from my mom's house, when you see that scene in where they're on the canoe on what looks like they're on the bayou or the marsh or whatever, that's actually a little estuary that wraps around a guy's house. So at no point were those people more than 25 yards from shore. And because of it, we didn't have to get the safety team. But, one of the guys didn't know how to paddle a canoe. He had never been in a canoe. And if you watch the scene closely, you can see like he's got his hands crisscrossed in like this weird way. And we gave him hell on the set. So this guy, he works as a grip on a lot of shows, and he'll be like 80, 90 feet up on the catwalk hanging lights, but you'd never been in a canoe. He was scared of the canoe. So that was funny. And that was the guy in the green shirt with the dreads, Devin. Also, we had one day left, and our booking of the 1800s homestead, the actual location is called Obadiah's Okefenokee in Folkestone, Georgia. That was actually an 1800 homestead. There's a park there that you can go visit as a historical site in Waycross. And we had booked it for one day, but we ran over shooting, so we weren't able to use it that day. So the next day we had to figure out how to take our team and get all the coverage that we needed with the limited amount of light that we had. And we decided to break into 2 units. Tori took one off to the homestead. I took the other one to the abandoned turpentine mill. We were able to get the coverages done, and we didn't get what we wanted totally from either because we had to split the cameras and split our assets, but we ended up with something that continued to move the story. And at the abandoned turpentine mill, my mother's grandfather and father actually worked at that turpentine mill before she was born. That little town of Beach, Georgia was probably only like 500 people. So there's a railroad track that goes right through the middle of the town. Turpentine mill on the other, right across the street is the hospital my mother was born in. And it's all still around family land that used to be connected to this church. And when we were setting up to do the scene in the abandoned turpentine mill, we actually had to have the gaffer hack away some overgrowth so we could put lights in a certain place. And he found a funerary wreath and some flowers. And it shut production down for like an hour because we're like, should we continue? Because the whole story that we're talking about is people encroaching on places that they shouldn't have been and catching hell because of it. So, I mean, like production, we were kind of looking at each other and people were looking at me like, Greg, what are we going to do? And I'm sitting here like, we spent too much money to stop that.
None of y'all thought to call a priest or an
Yeah,
archaeologist to come check it out? Y'all are just
but
like,
you know,
I don't
my
know.
thoughts
Okay,
were,
let's keep going.
my cousin and I, she got real emotional about it. I was like, well, this is actually maybe why we're here. Maybe the whole Duppy Man thing, the way that land spoke to me was actually to get us out here one day in this place so we could uncover this thing. So my mom, I think my cousin actually took it back to my mom. I wouldn't have touched it, but we shot the scenes. It was kind of spooky. But then we found out from a family member that it had been put there in like 1964 for
Wow.
somebody else that was in the family because the mill had been abandoned since like the early 60s. And I think that what we saw wasn't because the person was buried there, but it was put there to commemorate the life that they had spent working there. So nobody was actually buried there.
Okay.
And so we felt good about it after that. But it was spooky. It was kind of spooky. But those are my fondest memories of all of it.
Well, that's pretty cool and ominous and fitting for the production that you were doing. That's
Right.
pretty neat. Well, so long as you prayed over the thing and said, "We wish you well and we honor your memory. Now, please don't curse me." I think you were probably okay. Did you do all that?
I think that the Earth was terraformed by aliens. So I didn't do that, but others did.
That's a whole other conversation.
Right, right. But no,
One,
we did say some words, and we asked. My cousin gave a little blessing, and we were real respectful about how we went about it. But yeah, we when the sun started to get low, we made sure we got our stuff and got the hell out of there.
that is smart. Now, you had mentioned something about when you were on your mother's land, you felt like you're always being watched. Was it a sense of being watched by people, or was it that sense of being around so much nature?
Both, because as a black man, I had never been on that much property that we could say was ours. That in itself bugged me out because everywhere that I went, everywhere that I saw, no matter what I did, this was still ours. And that's a crazy feeling when you grow up in apartments or acre lots, if you're lucky. And now you got, 60, 70 of them. The world, the nature, the trees, the hogs, the deer, the squirrel. And you're just kind of like, I have a place in this. That alone was eerie to begin with. Because, I mean, like, I don't spend a lot of time in the woods in general, but knowing that all these woods was ours and, like, it was my responsibility to know what was out there, that was weird. But the other part that I heard speaking to me, it was kind of goes back to the idea that, like, I belong here because that as a military brat is something you don't always get either. Home is where you make it, but as a military kid, you're moving around all the time, having to make wherever you get sent to home. And the idea that this was gonna be ours for as long as we were alive and maybe generations past, part of that was the reason that I felt like the land was speaking to me. It was kind of like a welcome home, which is where I got the reclamation theme of the Duppy Man from. Our family wasn't on that land, but coming back to that land that my mother had bought for herself and her kids and the generations after, it felt like we were reclaiming something that had been potentially lost. And that's where the story came from.
I think that's a very interesting and illustrative experience you had of the kind of humbling that comes with being connected to the spirit of the land because we're creatures. Forests are full of creatures. The trees are creatures. The grass are creatures. The squirrels, the coyotes, all that stuff is creatures. And if you grow up in suburban or urban areas and you never get exposed to that, people are missing out on part of the human experience, particularly what those that came before us, they had to learn how to accommodate and live with that nature, because we
Right.
get to dominate a lot of our nature. Now, sometimes nature does this and there ain't nothing we can do about it, but we have a lot of control over it. And nature's not the most comforting thing all the time because, it eats itself constantly and it'll eat you if it gets a chance. A tree will
Yes,
eat you
sir.
if it can. But understanding your place in everything, like what you were just talking about, it's important to get that perspective. So that's cool. If anybody listening has just lived in like a concrete jungle your whole life, go out to a national park for a couple days. Leave your phone or turn your phone off so
Mhm.
you're not just doom scrolling while surrounded by nature.
Right.
Get that different feeling. It'll teach you something.
It definitely will. And it definitely is humbling because the first thing I thought about was, good Lord, I bet the First Nations caught hell out here trying, because again, like you said, we get to dominate it, but they had to find synthesis with it. Man, could you imagine? Like I couldn't. I was just dumbfounded. And then when you put it in a historical perspective, imagine how much we've lost with what we call civilization from, like you said, the human experience. You know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
it was incredible. And now that place has become a centerpiece of our family, not just my mom's immediate family, but our grandkids, nieces, nephews, uncles, her brothers and sisters. That's the family's homestead now. We're just not necessarily reclaimed, but from now on, you know what I mean? And we're doing everything we can to preserve it and bring people. It's amazing, bro. It's what she did after giving me the world as a kid was brought me back to a place that she knew as home and showed me how I belong as part of it. And to me, that is what the Duppy Man is about. The family is reclaiming the land, but in doing so, they're also reclaiming that lost history that they lost traveling the world and bouncing from place to place and not knowing the history of their family or what the people went through to preserve it for them. And it's been an enriching experience, her owning that land for everybody in our family.
That's great. I'm sure that means something to her whenever you tell her that kind of thing, because
Mm.
how could it not feel good to help enrich someone else's experience like that? That's awesome. So hopefully her retirement's going well.
Yeah,
Good deal.
she's doing good.
How is it living in Atlanta? You've been there for about 7 years now, is that right?
Since 2015.
What part are you in? And
We're,
do you love it or do you hate it or do you just tolerate it?
I love Atlanta.
Cool.
Atlanta, once you get past the traffic and what people think Atlanta is, Atlanta's amazing, man. And I'm gonna tell you a secret. People who live in Atlanta love it and they don't want you moving here. No, I'm dead ass. Like they
Smart.
don't want you coming because there's an expression that says we're full. You know, you see the traffic, you see I-85 and I-75 coming into Atlanta. I love it, man. The city has been trying to get me here for a long time. When I was a kid, I used to come visit relatives here and I hated it because all I saw was opportunities to get into trouble, getting in trouble, and all the kind of stuff the young and dumb find their ways into. But coming back as a 40-something-year-old man, oh man, I appreciate it so much. And granted, it's a different city than it was at that time that I was visiting it in the 90s, but Atlanta is amazing. Art, culture, history, commerce. It's sexy, it's educated, it's sophisticated, it's economically dynamic, it's beautiful. I mean, not everywhere. We got our problems just like every other major city, but let me tell you, living and working in Atlanta is amazing. Other than the traffic, I need water. Like the Chattahoochee's not doing it for me. I would appreciate it if there's a beach. I'm from Florida. But no, I really love it. The people are very friendly, regardless of what you might hear. I never feel unsafe anywhere that I go. I'm not saying there's not dangers out there, but we just became the sixth largest city in the United States. Tons of people move here every year, and those people wouldn't be here if it sucked. The secret that they don't want you to know is how incredible it is here.
It's a big deal of a city. I gotta say, it's got the best airport I've been in as far as like a major airport. It goes everywhere. It's well organized and it's not Chicago O'Hare because O'Hare sucks. I hate that airport. But Atlanta, it might be a long way to my next gate, but There's a reasonable way to get there in a timely fashion. There's plenty to do there. So y'all doing some things right in Atlanta. That's for
Yeah.
true.
I'm north of the city in Marietta, but that's cool for me because I didn't move to Atlanta to live in the suburbs. I came to Atlanta for the energy of the city, but I live 15 minutes north of it where I can get the quiet when I want it. And then when I want to go get involved into the pulsating creative energy that is Atlanta, it's right there for me. And with my job now, the tours, I'm in it almost every day. So I really get what I need from it. And then I fight traffic to get home to peace and quiet. So I really like it. I mean, minus a beach and like good Caribbean food, it's cool.
Wait, they don't have good Caribbean food there? Even
They
I
do.
have
It's
good
just
Caribbean
far
food.
from me. Yeah, like I have to go into the city to find it. Like we got, some staples, like a couple of places up here. But when you want that good from the yard Jamaican jerk, ackee and saltfish, you have to go search it out. It's not like in Florida. I mean, throw a rock and you'll hit somebody making guava patties and callaloo. But here you have to go seek it out. And that's one of the things that from where I am. In Atlanta, you don't have to, but for me, it's a drive. So other than that, I really don't have a lot of complaints. I really enjoy Atlanta. It's a vibrant city. And it's a
Oh,
city that's still growing. You know how cities get big, they come to their zenith, and then they're like struggling not to decline. That is not what Atlanta is. Atlanta is still becoming what it's going to become every day, rather than a city trying to hold on to the glory of the past.
yeah, unfortunately, we got quite a few of those these days. Well, glad to hear that Atlanta's doing well, at least in your day-to-day life of it. And you gave me cause to be grateful for where I live again, talking about Caribbean food, because I've got not one, but three Jamaican restaurants, and they're good too, within a 20-minute drive. And some of them are shorter, but the furthest one's 20 minutes away. And I like them. I like them. They're good jerk chicken, some festivals. You get the right rice and beans, and it's
Yes,
good stuff.
sir. With
Yeah.
the extra gravy.
Yeah, well, it's flavor, right? And
Yeah.
the only thing that I'm missing here, my wife and I really like Ethiopian food. It's different than Indian. I mean, if you squint, Indian kind of looks like it, but it ain't the same cuisine. And we don't have one. There might be a local who's going to do it sometime soon, and we hope she does it. We'll buy from her every day, but it's delicious stuff. So sushi, I'm covered. Fish, I'm covered. Barbecue, it's not Memphis barbecue, but it's good enough barbecue. We got Hawaiian places, all this and that, but Ethiopia, we're missing out. Y'all, you got an Ethiopian restaurant around
We
here?
have a ton of African restaurants, Ethiopian, Nigerian. There's a
Mm-hmm.
Congolese place here that's pretty good. Atlanta has a very large African community. I mean, even I'm like, oh, you're black. No, I'm not black. I'm from Africa. So then there's
I'm
a
milk chocolate.
difference. Right, right.
I'm not of the Ebony tribe.
There's a lot of regional and specifically ethnic African restaurants in and around Atlanta, because Kenyan food is very different from Nigerian food. You wouldn't think so, but it's true. And I haven't got out to as many of them as I would like, but I have gone to one Kenyan place and this one place. I'm not sure what the tradition of the food is, but they got that really good fufu.
In Providence, Rhode Island, they have this West African place that real easy to miss. It looks like it's an abandoned building, but when you go in, there's people in there and it's nice. Sue's Kitchen, I think. And the cuisine bore a lot of similarities to soul food, American South soul food, and it was delicious. We don't have one of those either. So when you talk about Nigerian food, I'm like, I think I know what you're talking about. And it was
Right.
wonderful. Now, you mentioned film festivals a few times now. Why'd you pick the HP Lovecraft Film Festival to apply and get into that? The film definitely fit into the genre they're looking at, but what got you to do that?
I have a sister who loved the HBO Lovecraft Country, and she
Oh.
got me into actually reading about like Lovecraft himself. And so I was looking for festivals to enter, and I liked the idea of cosmic horror because the Duppy Man, again, especially when you think about the feature script, it has supernatural horror elements, but it's not horror. It really is hybrid story about this young man coming of age around this ghost story. And I thought, well, this could be a good venue, at least to get some people who are into horror but don't expect it to be blood and guts to get a look at the film and kind of gauge what that audience thinks of it. And then so I started looking at the festival submission requirements, and they had a minority director waiver. I was like, that's me. so so I went ahead and applied. I did not think that we would get accepted, and I damn sure didn't think they would ask us to screen at both Mobile and Portland. And we were over the moon about that, and a lot of people around us were too.
That's good. So when it comes to film festivals, is your strategy to just get into every film festival you can get into? Or are you very strategic in, I went into this one because it'll get seen by these people. I went into this one because of these reasons. What's your method?
We were really selective because we didn't have a lot of budget for festivals. One of the things I'm going to do from now on, marketing has to be a part of your initial budget. Film festivals and possibly travel has to be a part of your budget because the
Smart.
number of festivals we could not attend, man, I lose sleep thinking about it right now because it could have meant exponentially more opportunities like this one. Young filmmakers, I tell them that all the time now. Even if it's not a lot, put something away. We definitely didn't try to get into as many as we could. We focused first on the four biggies. So we did Berlin, we did Sundance, we did Telluride. We did 5 biggies and we focused on the ones that actually have film markets. Because when you have a film market, that's a different level of competition, but it's also the opportunities to get seen by distributors, sales agents, and people like that. So we focused upon those. Didn't get into any of them. And but the other things that we wanted to do were because we have a story about Black people in the South, we focused on Black film festivals all over the country. We focused on specific regions where we wanted to see how we stacked up against competition. So we had a bunch of West Coast entries. I think we had 12 and we got accepted to like 7. And what that was to test our ideas against the best competition we could find out there, like South by Southwest applied to, because we wanted to see how we stacked up. So part of the strategy was get it in front of our primary audience, even though the Duppy Man's a story about an American family, so it could be any market, but people who could relate to the material, to test ourselves against the stiffest competition we could find in other festival markets like LA, New York, Chicago, Texas, then to do genre specific stuff like horror festivals, thriller festivals, and things like that, just to see what level of competition we were. When we first applied at our film festivals, Tori, my partner, and I made a bet about how many we would get into. And our first round of festivals was like 35. And he was like, man, I can't believe you spent all that money to get into these festivals. I was like, how many do you think you were going to get into? He said 6. I said 15. So I was closer to right than him because it's actually going to end up being a total of like 28.
That's pretty good. Yeah. It's more than I've been in. So I mean, out of 35, 28, that's pretty darn good.
Well, ultimately, we applied to some others. We did this interesting thing that could be fun for people that want to go to festival but don't have money. What we did is got in our social media network and we said, if you want to support our film, don't donate money. Pay for our festival entry and we'll let you pick the festival. So it became like a film festival lottery. If you think our film will do good in your region or at a festival that you like, pay for the entry fee and I'll submit it. And then I sent them the receipt saying that I did. And we actually got into a couple of festivals that way, letting other people pick.
Creative.
We were trying to do what we could to kind of engage whatever audience that we had and also to kind of let, because I think I spent like $2,200 on festival entries. They're not cheap, but it definitely needs to be a part of your strategy to cater it towards what you've created and who you believe your primary demographics to be. That's the smartest thing you can do with those film festival dollars because they add up. You give yourself the best chances to actually be seen and selected. And being selected is not as good as being seen. Being seen is what you really want. Being selected is great, but if you're selected for a festival that nobody ever heard of or is internet only and it doesn't really have an audience, it's great to have the laurel, but has anybody seen your film? And that's kind of the way we went about putting together our festival strategy. And do the big ones first. Because a lot of times, if you've been in a bunch of little small ones, the big ones don't see you as a good draw because you've already had premieres in their region. Like LA, for instance, we screened, I think, like 6 times in Los Angeles, 4 or 5 times in Los Angeles. And bigger festivals see that and they're like, well, why would we bring them here when they've already been screened in this region a bunch of times? That's something I never understood, but apparently is a thing.
They're not getting the hot freshness because it's
Right.
already been around. Well, it's kind of like what I do with my interviews is I pick folks that I think deserve more love than I can tell that they're getting. And so like I interview a bunch of role-playing game industry people. And so the folks that got a million interviews and everybody's asking all these questions, I ain't going to add anything to that. But for
Mhm.
folks that I think deserve more credit than what they get, I'm happy to give them that little bit of spotlight that I got. Some of them say it's helping their sales. That's great. That's good to go. Hopefully, more people will check your stuff out
Absolutely.
now that I share this around. But now you've won some stuff at
Yeah.
these film festivals, or the Atlanta Movie Awards, Florida Short Films Festival. You did well at the Dubai Independent Film Festival. Dubai, how'd that happen? Atlanta, I get.
Yeah.
Florida, I get. Dubai?
That was interesting. So I'm flipping through Film Freeway, the 60% discount code on the Dubai Film Festival. My partner Tori actually does a lot of work out there as a DP. He goes over there and does all kind of stuff. And he told me we need to enter this. So we did, became a finalist. Only the award winners got picked because they do an online screening thing. It's not even a live festival, but we were finalists. And we actually, what I thought was most amazing is we won the Audience Choice Award at the African American Film Festival of the Quad Cities in Des Moines, Iowa. And I was like, Iowa, that's a really conservative audience, even for Black people. And the Duppy Man's Walk, you've seen the short. It's not family fare in all cases. You know what I mean? So that was one of the things that surprised me. But it just showed us kind of the reach of what our audience was. And we were not even nominated for a regular award in that festival, but we won the Audience Choice Awards. So the judges were like, pass, but the audience was like, no, so I thought that was cool. But Dubai, that was definitely interesting. And they keep sending me stuff to submit other things, but there's nothing really at the level of the Duppy Man that I would feel comfortable sending them, right? Definitely not the Delgaum or the Annunciation. You know what I mean?
Well,
But
I encourage you to not get rid of those because, and to not hide them, instead to let people see them because I think it's important for folks to see where you started so they can measure how far you've come.
no, that's bad.
And people start watching you for a reason, right? And maybe it was one of those movies that some person in India was like, yes, Greg, I love Greg. Now I'm going to watch everything Greg makes. Maybe that's their thing. Don't take it away from them, right?
No, absolutely.
So, what's it like to win an award at a film festival? Do they give you a
Um,
pony ride? Do you get a little crown? Do you
it
get
depends on
a
the
bottomless
festival.
popcorn?
It depends on the festival, but I gotta tell you, in my experience, it was pretty anticlimactic. I was like mad happy, like, and I was very proud and happy to share it with all the cast and crew and the people that helped us, supported us to do it. But I just kept thinking to myself, man, when is this going to turn into money?
A reasonable question. A
Right.
reasonable question.
I was like, that's great, but I mean, it was a huge ego boost and like self reaffirming that I'm not a fraud. But it was anticlimactic to me in a lot of ways. I felt really good about it for about an hour. Went out, drank, did whatever I needed to do to celebrate. But then I came back to the house and I'm like, but I still got to get up and go to work tomorrow. I still got to start finding ways to make the feature. I still got to keep plugging away. It was exhilarating for a period of time. One of them came with an honorarium of like $85, but it's a good deal to put on the poster and have out there in the world as your bona fides. I'm just so anxious for what's next. People always ask me, so what are you gonna do now? What are you gonna do now that your film is out there killing it? I'm gonna start working on the next one. To me, that's the healthy response. Is I'm not gonna sit on my haunches and just shower in the acclaim and adoration of this. I need to start working on the next thing that's bigger, better, more spectacular.
Now, how many of these do you go to in person? Like, did
Oh
you go
man,
to Dubai?
the hell no. Um,
I agree with the sentiment. I'm
but
not on my
no.
list of places to go.
So Dubai, again, it wasn't an in-person festival. It was actually all done via internet. So nobody went because
Oh,
at
oh,
that time, the geopolitics of the area was not conducive to international travel. I'll just leave it at that. We got to go to Mobile. We did almost everything we could in Atlanta. That was honestly about it. The film has got to be like the second most expensive hobby in the world behind like car collecting.
oh.
And I wish I could have gone to more. I wish I had planned for the success that we had. That would have allowed me to
Mm.
put away the resources to do it. But quite frankly, we were astonished at the amount of success the film had. Because I mean, we had some technical issues. I'm not afraid to say it. Technically, it wasn't the product that we wanted to put out, and because of it, we were kind of leery about what kind of success we would have at festival. But we knew we had something we thought was special. But I wish I had just planned for it better because that would have made a difference. I think I went to about six altogether. Went to Bronze Lens here in Atlanta, which was a biggie for us, Oscar qualifying. We didn't qualify for the Oscar, but it was Oscar qualifying. Went to Mobile, did about four or five others here in the Atlanta Metro, but that's it. This month, we're in Vegas at the Las Vegas Black Film Festival and the DMV International Film Festival. I can't make either one of them either because I got to work. So
Yeah, yeah. And you're working on another movie project?
right now, I am doing film and locations tours here in Atlanta. We do Walking Dead, we do Stranger Things, we do Cobra Kai, we do the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I actually work for a tour company that does also, they do like Atlanta architectural history, Atlanta Civil War history. They have similar tours in Savannah and Oahu. Savannah, Charleston, Oahu, and Atlanta. And this is something I fell into during the strike, and I really enjoy it. I get to stay connected to the film industry. I get to come home and see my daughter at the end of the day and spend instead of spending 12, 15 hours on set. So I'm kind of content doing that right now while I'm putting my rest of my energy and resources behind getting the Duppy Man's feature packaged up for investors and soliciting investors.
Cool. So we talked about some of the problems in modern Hollywood, the movie industry as a whole. Are there any particular studios that give you hope for something better to come? Or there's no pulling up on the plane right now where we just have further down to go before hopefully something better comes along?
Me personally, as a film watcher, I've kind of given up on the major studios because they seem to be content to rehash old stuff, bring back old prop. But like, there are a lot of indie houses out there that I'm really excited. Blumhouse, A24. I would like to see the rise of some of these indie companies because they seem to be the ones that are willing to take the risk on the content. And I think that's why the studio system is less prominent than it used to be. And I think it started with HBO, like The Sopranos, Boardwalk Empire, and some of that stuff. They started taking risk on edgy material. And that gave the birth of these original series that we see in a lot of these streaming platforms that are equal in quality to the Hollywood stuff. They create better content because they tell more divergent stories. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's where a lot of future should be going, is allowing indie houses and upstarts to come tell that cornucopia of stories that studios are just not interested in telling anymore, or never had real interest in telling because they don't see the value of the product. And that's why these streaming services are kicking them in the head right now.
That's a good point. Totally agree on the A24. Everything I've seen of theirs, I've enjoyed, and they're pushing the envelope in a bunch of different ways. There's some things of theirs I haven't seen that my wife tells me I'm good with having missed out on. But when you're taking risks, some of them land, some of them don't. And maybe
Right.
they landed for other people and they just wouldn't have landed for me. And that's
Right.
fine. I do wish, though, that we had movie critics that were worth a damn these days because I find I can't trust most of them because we know the Rotten Tomatoes, you can pay to get the score you want. And the
Really?
critic score is often wildly incongruous to what the audience thought of the movie. Usually I agree with the audience. Even folks that I follow on YouTube, like The Critical Drinker, I think he's hilarious and he's got some good insights. Just recently, I watched a movie that he crapped all over. I went and watched it, finally gave it a chance, and I thought, this dude was just a hater, and this is a good movie. I should not have listened to him. And now I'm wondering, can I trust any of the critics that are out there? What do you think? Is
I
the
don't
art
know.
of being a film critic basically dead, or is there any hope?
So my thoughts on it are twofold because I found something interesting when in doing festivals. So, do you know that studios can limit what gets seen at festivals by saying that they will participate with their own films?
I didn't know that.
Nor did I, but this is what I've been told by some programmers. So they say, like, if you don't get accepted, you can email the programmer and get feedback. And more than once during our festival run, especially towards the end of it, once not COVID was over, but once the strike was over, studios put their films into festivals at that time so that they could start to get publicity and press around them going. And that limited the types of things that were small and independent that got put into festivals. So I wonder if the critic thing is kind of the same way. Or not that the critics are basically in the pockets of the studios, but the critics know they don't get the access to some of the big stuff that they really want to do if they don't put the right word out about stuff. That's just me thinking, but I know for a fact that programmers told us, oh yeah, well, it was highly competitive this year because this movie with this name talent is going to be in the festival, and the studio enters, it raises all rising tide, lifts all ships or whatever. So it rose the level of competition that was going to be in the rest of the programming phases, rather than if the studios hadn't been in there and got that additional press, the names drew people to the festivals. And because of that, they had an elevated level of expectation for the stuff that they showed. Even smaller festivals, because there was only so many of the big ones were basically done. But those smaller ones that were left that usually were niche or indie, now that the studios got films in them, it lifted the tides of everything else. So if we weren't good enough on the indie thing, when the studios get involved, it crowds out a whole nother level of quality that now doesn't get to be seen, and something that it might have normally had a chance of being screened at because the festivals were getting sponsorships. And I wonder if being a critic is kind of that way.
I wonder.
Just
Oh,
something
and
to think
then
about.
in case anybody turns that criticism back at me, because I do short movie reviews and I reviewed all the shorts from the HP Lovecraft Film Festival, no one's buying my opinion. This is a 100% self-funded operation. And so if you don't like my takes, well, that's just because I'm a jerk, I guess. I don't know.
Send
But
them a check.
and now I've got some more academic questions for you. Is there a movie out there that you wished you had been the one to direct it? Like one that you're watching and said, man, I could have done such a better job with this, or I would have had a better vision for this. Is there any of those?
Yeah. Um, but the one that I think fits that idea most is actually one that I really enjoyed. I wish I had been able to direct it though. And it's actually one of my top 5 favorite films.
Oh,
And
great.
it's The Crying Game.
Really?
Have you ever seen it?
I haven't, but I know of it by reputation. It is on my list of things to see because it made quite an impression when it hit.
The Crying Game was instrumental in my filmmaking career because I saw it at a young age. Like I was like 13 when I saw The Crying Game. And you talk
That's
about having your mind blown, baby.
that's something to deal with at 13.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what it taught me is that kind of the John Crow thing. There are a million different stories under the sun that can be told, and just because you can't relate to them doesn't mean they're not compelling. And I thought
Yes.
The Crying Game. We always hear, oh, I want platonic love, platonic love. I want somebody to just love me for me. But then when you see what it looks like, you're kind of like, oh. So that's what platonic love looks like. But the story was great. And it just captivated my imagination in a way that I understood that stories can be about anybody going through anything as long as they're compelling, captivating, and done well. And The Crying Game changed my ideas about what I thought I could do and be as a writer. And I wished I had a chance to direct it. I don't think I would have done it better, but it's more of a thing of envy. You know what I mean? Like, damn, that could have been me. I wish that was me.
Yeah, no, I totally get that feeling you're talking about. I wasn't expecting that answer, but the element of surprise you hit me with and the kind of depth that that choice shows, I really like that. I'm glad that was the answer you gave. That's really good.
No, I appreciate it. You can check it out. You'll see exactly. It really is brilliant. And it defies a lot of the norms of narrative that we're told that must be part of the construct, part of the consideration. Man, I got a chance to work with Forrest Whitaker on my internship, Finding Steve McQueen, and I told him that was my favorite film. And he kind of looked away for a minute like he was trying to remember it. And then he looked back at me and he was like, Thank you for that. Because, because he was young at the time. It was like right after Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And I don't think we had seen anything like that I mean, maybe Polanski with what he did with pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable in storytelling. And you see, they ran him off. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
just always stuck with me. The power of the stories that you can tell, and actually the scope of things that you can explore if you're brave.
Well, and I think if you can, well, I haven't seen it, but I do intend to. The idea that you can take this story that a lot of people might not be able to relate to, but you tell it so well that they can connect to it. That's
Yes.
power in storytelling.
Yes.
And you got me excited to watch the thing now, so I got to check it out. And if it's terrible, I'm gonna be like, "Here's my $10 towards Duppy Man feature film," and I hate you, Greg. I have to abide by my own rules, you know?
Right. You're right. No, I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy it because
That is
it's
cool.
it's it's totally unexpected.
All right. So if you could make a feature length film and we had to set aside Duppy Man Walk for this example and budget's no concern, what kind of movie would you make?
I've actually been working on that movie, writing it rather. I would like to. So I'm kind of an ancient aliens nut. So I would like to tell a modern day, I kind of frame it as like a dark comedy, but it's like Indiana Jones meets Romancing the Stone
Oh,
with
yeah.
an ancient alien's backbone.
Oh, I love it.
I call it the Mask of the Dogon Queen. And if you know about the Dogon tribe in Africa and their connection, so I don't want to get into it too much, but oh my God. It starts with three guys robbing an adult bookstore managed by two dwarves. And then it goes on from there. And it's a dark comedy. But I see it in my head. I write it. I let a few people read it. They love it. I would love to actually do it, but my imagination is wild, so I gotta kind of rein myself in. But that is the one I want to do.
Oh, that sounds fun, dude. Because Romancing the Stone is such a fun movie.
Yes.
And many of the Indiana Jones were so ambitious. And I think all that would, there's the same kind of genre as, was it Alan Quartermain? And we need more adventure movies like that, where there's a sense of wonder. And then you put, oh, yeah, I love that, dude. Oh, that sounds great. Oh, okay. I'm glad I asked that question. I'm glad that's the answer you gave me. Oh, that's great. Oh, that's fantastic. I think if I ever won the lottery, I would just find Terry Gilliam and like a bunch of money. If I won a big lottery, I would find Terry Gilliam, hopefully before he dies. It'll be awkward if he's dead by then, and say, all right, Terry, you've always had a problem with getting financing. Here's some money. Go make the movie you want. Because he's my favorite director. Whatever he churns out, I'm probably going to enjoy. Just hopefully he doesn't make a sequel to Tideland. That's what I would go. But, you might be on the list now, too. If I win the
That's what's up.
lottery, you might hear from me. That check, I don't know if I got enough expletives to go with the size of the check. That's like 1.9 mil. But yeah, anyway. So you mentioned one of your five favorite films. So that's a question I like to ask all my guests because I like movies. The folks that watch us like movies. What is your favorite film? And if you can't do one, as you kind of spoiled, what's your top, I guess, five, since you hinted at that?
Hmm. Favorite is hard. My top five in no particular order, definitely The Crying Game. I love The Natural. I love The Natural. I think The Natural's great.
That's not a bad choice.
No, there's something like, I know it's cheesy and kind of like very nostalgic, but it was done so well.
There's a style to it.
Yeah, it's like chicken soup. It's very homey and easily digested. It makes you feel warm inside.
And what's wrong
Um,
with that? Why can't we have more movies like that? Why can't we just
no,
enjoy things?
I agree. I agree. I really love the Amistad
Really?
because it was brave. Debbie Allen went like 12, 15 years trying to get it produced in Hollywood. Nobody would touch it. And finally, Steven Spielberg came along and helped her get it together. And he said he wanted to do it for his African American children. And the way that it was done was so uncompromising. See, this being creative is about more than just making stuff people like. At some point, what people like has to be a secondary concern to the story that has to be told. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Do you think when Gutenberg started printing up copies of the Bible, people were digging the story? You know, the Bible is brutal. The Bible is filled with war and death and like really hard philosophical doctrine. And like, I'm sure it wasn't that, but it was a story that had to be told. You know what I
Yeah, I
mean?
mean, the Old Testament is chock full of God chooses some people and they screw up, so he smites them, and then they work their way back into his good graces. And then, like, each of the books of the prophets is a prophet coming along saying, hey, y'all quit messing up. God's going to smite you. And then they chase him off or try to kill him, and then God smites him. And then the New
Right.
Testament, we're all a bunch of flawed individuals. And the one guy who came along to help us, look what happened to him. You know, it's, yeah, it is not a happy book. It's
No,
not a
no.
calm book either. I think a lot of people read the words of Jesus and think he's just talking like this the whole time. This is the dude who hand wove a whip and took after people. This guy had some passion to him. I'm
Yeah,
confident of it. And
yeah.
so it's a way more entertaining book than I think a lot of people give it credit for, because there's
I
some
think
screwed up stories and even that feed into the ancient alien stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah, and the way that we get it, I was going to say the way that we digest it, but the truth is it's actually ladled to us a couple spoons at a time so that we are being indoctrinated and not reading it as a novel. But to your point, one of my other favorite movies I was going to mention is The Passion of the Christ, the one that Mel Gibson did. For the same reasons I love Amistad, it was uncompromising. And another one of those films that I loved really to death is another Mel Gibson film, Apocalypto, for the same reasons. It's uncompromising. The characters, the story is great, and it takes you, it's a type of escapism, but you're not escaping any further than, you know, history. So it's not kind of totally fantasy and all that. It's actually rooted in something we have a lot of understanding of. But that story, like, what are the chances that got told somewhere? You know what I mean? So,
It
you know,
took
I know
someone like Mel Gibson who's willing to pony up his own money and tell people to screw off. He's going to do his own thing to make it happen. And then a lot of people get their fifis hurt about, oh, you portrayed these people as being savage, barbaric. They ate people all the time. And like their neighbors said that we don't like them because they take us, enslave us, and eat us, and then cut our hearts out for their God. Mel Gibson didn't make that up.
right.
And a lot of people can't conceive of a human experience completely alien to their own. And it's practically like a different world looking at that. But that's one of the strengths of the movie. So great choice.
And I love at the end when the ship shows up with the cross on it, that world that was alien to us, when we come and we come with that iconography that we recognize as our civilization, how they look at it as something totally alien. That point you made is on point.
Thank you. And you got me. Now that you mentioned the Dogon, the mask
You're
of the
not going to be able
Dogon
to stop
Queen.
thinking about that, bro. I'm telling
I
you.
like it. I like it. And that's something else that we talked about in Mobile. In this conversation, there's all these cultures that have stories to tell. And the Dogon, very interesting people. They have, with their naked eyes, knowledge of the stars that they shouldn't have had, or no one else had that we know of, and that the West didn't get until they got much more sophisticated technology to spot those celestial objects. Well, how did they know that? They have stories about that. And I'm not going to give them away because it's probably part of your script. And then, say, take the history of Ethiopia. If you want a Game of Thrones style epic set in Africa using predominantly Black and Semitic Black and Cushitic people, just open one history book of Ethiopia and it is wild stuff. I've read a bunch of them. I've studied it. It is fascinating. And those are more people that deserve to have their story told.
The
So,
Christians of Ethiopia.
yeah, they may have the ark.
Right, right, yeah.
Yeah,
There's a
in
lot of
Axum, there's this one
fascinating,
monk. Yeah.
man, there's tons of fascinating stuff that come out of traditions and theologies and regions of the world that, oh my God, if they could be explored in the way that Hollywood has the resources to do, we wouldn't need 6 Marvel Avengers movies or whatever, because
Yes.
there's such rich stuff all over the place.
Yes. And related to the movie question, do you have a favorite director who's not you? And why
Hmm.
that director?
So I'm gonna go with Ridley Scott,
That's a good choice.
because you can't take your eyes off the screen. So the visual fabric and the narrative fabric, sometimes they can stray from each other. But you watch something, either Tony or Ridley, by the way, Tony or Ridley, and they are so seamless. I just think he has a mastery of how to develop captivating visual content from the narrative fabric. The guys that he works with, his DPs, he works with those guys all the time. He's just really a master at his craft. And they choose stories that are out of the ordinary. Men on Fire, Gladiator. I mean, I could go down the list. The narrative structures are not necessarily original, but the way that they choose to put them together feels like you're seeing it for the first time. Like, we know Gladiator stories, but we've seen Spartacus, and Gladiator, the way that they took you into the bowels of the Colosseum and the way that they weaved these characters of like slaves together into a family. Joaquin Phoenix was brilliant. That dude's amazing. Joaquin Phoenix is amazing. But like Ridley Scott, definitely one of my favorites, and I put Tony in the same bucket because they do a lot of good work. I grew up with like loving people like Kubrick. I was a Spielberg fan, but Spielberg makes movies. I really enjoyed films, and there is a difference. Movies should be a spectacular. Films can be quiet, intimate, and tug on your heart. You know what I mean? Different directors have their own styles. Kubrick, Scott.
If I can pile on the Ridley Scott love, think about it. Within just a few years of each other, that man turned out Alien, Legend, and Blade Runner. Three incredibly self-contained universes of movies that continue to compel people today.
Yes.
Continue to influence aesthetics today. And then he went on to do all kinds of other stuff. Any one of those three is a masterwork. You'd be happy to have one of those in your career. He got three within like a decade.
Mm-hmm.
The man's mad talented. So,
Yes.
no, good choice, man.
And Legend has got to be one of the most underrated gems in, like, because people always talk about The Neverending Story. Loved it. It was great. But Legend was a spectacular.
Yes.
Visually, it was something that we had not seen. Fairies and demons and that it was amazing, bro. The world building imagination to visualize that in a way that you can communicate it to other people in the other departments and have it all come together. That is a talent, my friend. That does not happen easily. That takes work. It takes emotional intelligence. It takes emotional intelligence for you to verbalize that type of cinematic fabric to other people that then go out and help you build it. You know what I'm saying? Talented dudes.
Oh, yeah. Legend feels like a lived in world and a different
Mm-hmm.
world than what we've got. And when he set out to make a new fairy tale, he friggin' nailed it. And it's uncomfortable. It was creepy. It was scary, but it was filled with wonder and beauty. And then you got Tim Curry, you got young Tom Cruise, you got Mia Sara, other great actors that contributed to the thing. It's unfortunate that the post-production got mangled like it did, but I just within the past 6 months watched both the director's cut and the cinematic release, and it's a great movie. So I'm glad you appreciate it too. If there's anybody out there that hasn't seen it, go watch it. Both Greg and I want you to see it. You'll thank us for it.
Yeah.
So, another standard question. This one, the thought experiment that I like, that if you, Gregory Foxx Jr., woke up in an entirely different world, and it's a world that's either based on a movie or on a book. And I know from this conversation, you are well familiar with a plethora of those. So, there's a broad range for you to pick from. Which would it be and why? And you get the good parts of it and the bad parts. You were living there and you are Greg as you are right now.
That's a great question. Blazing Saddles. Blazing Saddles.
Oh, I totally didn't see that coming. Because you go from the Crying Game to Blazing Saddles. I love it, dude.
That world, it's they got their problems, but people are friendly after they get to know you. It's whimsical. It's a dichotomy in itself. It's the past and that present at the same time. It's filled with, Gene and the writing of Mel. I have a potty mouth. So I can appreciate the bluntness of politically incorrect humor and, I don't know. I just think that even if you get the bad stuff, what do you end up with? Like Mongo, you end up with
I don't think anybody died, did they? I mean, they got in fist fights, they got thrown in jail, they had problems, but no one got flayed alive or shot with a
No,
crossbow while they're on the toilet. None of
but
that.
the guy that did not bring gum to share did get shot.
Okay,
So
he
I will at
deserved it
least
though.
bring gum. I will bring enough gum.
Oh, Mel Brooks, that's a good choice. That's a good choice. He makes fun stuff.
Yeah, he absolutely does.
That is a classic of cinema, and I think a good roadmap for building a happy society because it teaches people to recognize and resolve differences and to find ways to get along. It's a good way of getting different groups to find common ground and
Yeah.
enjoy each other's company by making fun of each other in a
No,
good-natured way.
absolutely. Yeah. If you can't laugh at yourself, bro, like there's no hope for you.
Oh, I love that. That's good, man. Well, Greg, I appreciate your time. I've had a good time. I'm sure the folks at home have had a good time. We hope you've had a good time.
I
How do
have.
people connect with you and find out more about what you're doing?
You can connect with us at www.theduppymanswalk.com, TheDuppyMansWalk.com. And there you'll see all the links to LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and some other stuff. But if you want to reach me directly, you can reach me at johncrowcreative@gmail. That's what I'm using right now. It's JOHNCROW creative@gmail. And just shoot me an email.
And he does answer those. I found him to be very responsive when I reached out to see if he wanted to do an interview. And he was gracious enough to agree to that. So, again, thank you for that, sir.
No,
And he's easy to get in touch with. So, if you got any questions or you want to see one of the short films he's worked on and we don't have the link in the doobly doo yet, hit him up. He's the guy who can help you out. Well, I appreciate it, sir, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
thank you. It's been a lot of fun, man. I appreciate your support and interest in the film.
Heck yeah, keep making good stuff. Now, wasn't that interesting? I told you that was going to be interesting. So hopefully now you can see why it was I wanted Greg to join me on the show for that big talk. And I had a great time talking to him. Hopefully you did too. And all links to follow, reach out to, and send hate checks to Greg are in the description below. And of course, if you enjoyed this long form interview, please remember to make sure that you are subscribed to this channel so you can see more of it in the future. And comment along below with what you thought about what we talked about. What's your favorite movie? Is there a movie that you wished you had gotten to direct? And what's your opinion on stripping and dining at the same table? Let me know. I'm fascinated to hear what you had to say about that. And so, my dear friends, as we part for now, I wish you nothing but the best.